The night sky was clear above the McPherson Observatory, a canopy of stars stretching infinitely across the darkness, but I no longer found comfort in the familiar constellations. My name is Dr. Timothy Cole, senior astronomer, and I once considered myself lucky to spend my life peering into the mysteries of the cosmos. But that was before I found it, the thing that waits in the void, consuming all light, all hope. I record this log not for posterity, but as a warning. If you hear it, then what we found is no longer confined to the darkness between the stars. It has found its way here, and you must understand what that means. We thought we were prepared. We thought the James Webb Space Telescope would expand, our horizons show us new worlds, and perhaps, just perhaps, offer a glimpse into the existence of other sentient life. I believed in those possibilities more than anyone. For decades, I've spent countless nights at the observatory, meticulously collecting data, hungrily analyzing the secrets each star held. And then, 3 weeks ago, we aimed the JWST at a distant point in the galaxy, a star labeled HD 1284. At first, it seemed unremarkable, just another pinprick of light hanging in the vast expanse. That is until Sarah Brighton, my assistant, noticed something odd in the data. "Sir," she had said, voice tight with an edge of excitement, "there's an anomaly." I leaned over her workstation, my curiosity piqued. The screen showed
HD 1284's light curve, a normally steady pattern, dipping sharply at regular intervals. Every 2 Earth days, the star's brightness would decrease by a noticeable percentage, as if something massive and opaque was crossing in front
of it. Then, just as abruptly, the light would return to normal. My heart began to race. A discovery like this was what astronomers lived for, a new planet, potentially, or a binary star system with a hidden companion. But then Sarah's face twisted into a frown. It's not just the light curve," she said slowly, tapping at the keys. "I'm picking up fluctuations in the star's mass and temperature." That gave me pause. I leaned in closer, staring at the data feed in disbelief. The star wasn't just dimming, its mass was fluctuating. That was impossible. Stars don't simply lose and regain mass like a balloon being inflated and deflated. "Run." "The calculations again," I ordered, my voice sharper than I intended. Sarah flinched but obeyed, fingers flying over the keyboard. We sat in tense silence, the hum of the equipment the only sound in the empty observatory. The numbers updated on the screen, confirming what we had already seen. The fluctuations were real. Something was siphoning energy and mass from the star. "It's like something's eating it," Sarah whispered. I recoiled at the suggestion, but I couldn't deny what the data suggested. I felt a chill creep down my spine, a sensation I hadn't experienced since I was a young researcher confronted by the unknowable depths of the universe for the first time. It wasn't awe or wonder this time. It was fear. "Let's not jump to conclusions," I murmured, more to convince myself than her. "There's got to be a natural explanation. Dark matter, gravitational lensing, something we're not considering." Sarah nodded, but her expression remained troubled. What if it's alive?" "Alive." I scoffed, but the word lingered like a bad taste in my mouth. Stars are consumed all the time, by black holes, by neutron stars, but those are cold, mechanical processes. What she was suggesting was unthinkable, a predator that fed on stars like some cosmic parasite. Still, we had to know more. We spent the next week analyzing every bit of data we could pull from the JWST, rerunning simulations and cross-checking our findings with other telescopes. It was grueling work, the kind that would normally excite me. But every time we dug deeper, the answers we found only led to more disturbing questions. There were the dips in brightness, of course, growing longer and more pronounced, as if whatever was consuming the star was becoming more aggressive. The mass fluctuations were harder to quantify, but it became clear that the star was being stripped layer by layer of its outer shell. Then there was the temperature. As the star dimmed, its surface temperature dropped, a phenomenon that defied every known principle of astrophysics. Stars undergoing natural changes don't cool down like that, not unless their core energy is being sucked out. It was 2 weeks in when we got the first image. I'll never forget that moment. We'd managed to adjust the JWST's infrared capabilities to focus on a smaller area, hoping to capture whatever was causing the fluctuations. The screen flickered, pixels aligning as the image slowly rendered. I leaned in, my breath held tight in my chest, and "God," Sarah whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. There, haloed by the dying light of HD 1284, was a shadow. No, not a shadow. A presence. A dark, amorphous mass, almost like a smear of ink on the fabric of space itself. It was larger than a planet, nebulous and shifting, its edges blurring into the void. It seemed fluid, its form pulsing and rippling as if it were alive. My skin prickled. I stared, unblinking, as the thing undulated, extending long, sinuous tendrils toward the star. They wrapped around the blazing sphere, and the star flickered, its light swallowed by the darkness. It was as if the star itself were being smothered by an entity too vast and incomprehensible to grasp. "Jesus," I said, my voice barely audible. What the hell is that?" "Should we report this?" Sarah asked, eyes wide. I couldn't answer. I felt paralyzed, staring at the thing, devouring a star millions of times larger than Earth. To send this to NASA, to let the world know what we'd found, would change everything. I could already imagine the headlines: "Predator star discovered, unknown entity consuming stellar mass." But the implications, I couldn't help but feel that merely by observing it, by training our gaze on it, we were inviting its attention. "I need more data," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "If we report this now, they'll dismiss it as a glitch. We need to confirm. We need—" "What if it notices us?" Sarah interrupted, voice trembling. "Don't be ridiculous," I snapped, but the words rang hollow, because deep down, in the part of me that had always been most attuned to the cosmos, I felt a presence staring back through the lens, something aware and malevolent. I turned off the monitor. "It's just a star," I muttered. "We're jumping at shadows." But even then I knew it was a lie. I knew I would be back tomorrow staring at that same screen, watching that same terrible thing feeding. Because something in the back of my mind whispered that we were no longer the observers, we were the observed. A knock on my office door startled me from my thoughts. The sudden intrusion felt like a physical shock after so many hours of solitary focus. I turned, bleary-eyed, to see Sarah standing in the doorway, her face pale and tight with worry. "Timothy," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "They're waiting for you in the conference room. Dr. Ramirez just arrived." I felt a jolt of adrenaline. I hadn't expected Elena to get involved so soon. Dr. Elena Ramirez, the director of the JWST project, was a formidable presence, brilliant, ambitious, and known for her no-nonsense approach. If she was here, it meant this was no longer a research curiosity. It was an emergency. "Right," I muttered, brushing my unkempt hair back and fumbling for my glasses. "Let's go." The walk to the conference room felt like traversing a dark, lonely chasm. The usual hum of activity in the observatory was gone, replaced by an uneasy silence. I could feel the tension simmering in the air, the weight of too many sleepless nights bearing down on everyone. Something had shifted since our discovery of the feeder. It wasn't just the data or the unsettling images. It was the feeling that we were peering into something that should have remained hidden. The room was small, with the blinds drawn tight, a single table surrounded by grim-faced scientists. Elena stood at the head, her arms crossed. Beside her, Dr. Michael Yates, the observatory's chief physicist and my oldest friend, leaned back in his chair, staring thoughtfully at the blank screen in front of him. Opposite him was Dr. Ravi Singh, a cosmologist whose brilliance was matched only by his volatility. "Timothy," Elena said without preamble, fixing me with a sharp gaze as I took a seat. "Explain." I hesitated, glancing around the room. They were all waiting, their expressions a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled anxiety. I could feel Sarah's presence at my side. We were standing on the precipice of something monumental, and I wasn't sure if I could put it into words. "We've been monitoring HD 1284, I began, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. The fluctuations we detected in its brightness were unlike anything we've seen before. We initially thought it could be a planetary transit or some form of stellar instability, but it's not." I clicked a button on my laptop and the monitor behind me flared to life, displaying the first image we'd captured of the entity. A murmur rippled through the room. "This is what's causing the anomaly," I said quietly, gesturing to the dark, sinuous shape coiled around the star. "We believe it's some kind of entity, siphoning mass and energy from HD 1284. It's feeding on the star." Dr. Singh let out a low whistle. "Feeding? You make it sound like it's alive." "I don't know if alive is the right word," I admitted, "but it's certainly behaving in a way that suggests purpose. We've ruled out gravitational, lensing, dark matter, and any known astrophysical phenomena. Whatever this is, it doesn't follow natural laws." Elena narrowed her eyes. "What's its size?" "Roughly the mass of Jupiter, though it's hard to be precise. It doesn't have a consistent shape, it shifts like a fluid." I paused, swallowing hard. "And it's getting bigger." "How?" Michael leaned forward, his expression intense. "Where is it drawing mass from?" "The star's outer layers," Sarah said, speaking up for the first time. Her voice trembled slightly. "It's like a parasitic organism, latching on and draining it. And it's not just light, it's consuming. The gravitational field around the star is warping in response, almost as if the entity is absorbing space-time itself." A heavy silence settled over the room. Ravi's gaze flickered between me and Sarah, his mouth set in a grim line. "Are you suggesting it's a form of dark energy?" he asked. "I'm suggesting," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, "that we're dealing with something completely outside our understanding of physics. It doesn't behave like a physical object, yet it exerts physical influence. It's predatory." Michael laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "A predator star? Come on, Tim. That's absurd." "Is it?" I shot back, more forcefully than I intended. "Think about it. We've always assumed life to be bound by biological principles, but what if that's just a limitation of our perception? What if there are forms of life out there that don't fit our definitions? Forms that can thrive in the vacuum of space, that consume on a cosmic scale?" "Enough," Elena interrupted sharply. "We're not here to speculate. I want concrete data, Timothy. What is this thing? What are its capabilities? And most importantly, is it a threat?" I hesitated. Was it a threat? My instincts screamed yes, but I had no evidence to back up that fear. The feeder hadn't shown any aggression. It was just feeding. But there was something deeply unsettling in the way it moved, the way it reacted to the telescope's gaze. "There's more," I said softly. "When we focused the JWST on it, we detected a faint signal, a low-frequency hum that doesn't correspond to any known natural emissions." Ravi sat up straighter, his eyes sharp. "A signal? You didn't mention this before." "I wasn't sure what to make of it," I admitted. "It's almost imperceptible, buried in the background noise, but it's rhythmic, structured, almost like communication," Michael asked, his skepticism giving way to a glimmer of something darker. "Fear." "Yes," I whispered. "Or a lure." Elena's gaze hardened. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to continue. "What if this isn't the first star it's consumed? What if it moves from one stellar system to another, draining stars of their energy? And what if the signal we picked up is a beacon, a way to attract other sentient beings like us to come and investigate? And then it devours them, too." Ravi finished quietly, his face pale. "That's insane," Michael muttered, shaking his head. "Stars die all the time. Supernovae, black holes." "Not like this," I interrupted. "Not this deliberately. I don't think it's just consuming the star. It's baiting us, drawing us in. Another heavy silence fell over the room. I could see the disbelief on their faces, the struggle to reconcile what I was saying with everything they knew about the universe. But there was something else too, a flicker of doubt, of dread. Because if I was right... "How long do we have?" Elena asked, her voice flat. I stared at her, uncomprehending. "What do you mean?" She looked at me as if I were a child. "If it's aware of us, if it's hunting, how long until it finds us?" A shiver ran through me. I hadn't thought that far ahead. The idea of the feeder shifting its gaze from HD 1284 to Earth was too terrifying to contemplate. But as I opened my mouth to respond, Sarah let out a choked sound, her eyes wide with horror. "Dr. Cole, look at the screen." We turned as one. The image on the monitor had changed. The feeder, that dark, indefinite mass, was still coiled around the star, but it was no longer passive. It had shifted, its tendrils extended, reaching out as if it were searching. And then slowly, deliberately, it twisted. The star's light flared and dimmed again, a rhythmic pulse that sent a chill down my spine. It was looking back, at us. "It knows," I whispered. The room exploded into chaos. My descent into obsession began that night. The chaos of the meeting quickly subsided, but the fear never left. We went our separate ways, each struggling to grasp what we had witnessed. Dr. Ramirez immediately ordered a lockdown on all research involving HD 1284, restricting access to the telescope and data files. No one was to discuss it, document it, or, God forbid, leak it to the public. But I couldn't stay away. I spent the following days holed up in my office staring at the high-resolution images we'd captured of the feeder. I analyzed and reanalyzed the signal, listening to its rhythmic pulse until it was burned into my brain. There was something there, something hidden beneath the surface, just waiting to be uncovered. Sarah pleaded with me to take a break, to get some sleep, but I brushed her off, consumed by the need to understand what was it, how did it move, why did it feel like it was aware of us. I found myself waking up in a cold sweat every night, dreams haunted by shadowy tendrils coiling around stars, snuffing out their light. It was as if the feeder was creeping closer, inching its way through the black void toward me. Each time, I woke gasping and shivering. I would rush back to the observatory, needing to confirm that it was still out there, still confined to the distant reaches of space. And yet, every time I looked, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had moved. One night I intercepted something new. I was reviewing the star's emission spectra, trying to pick out any anomalies when I noticed a faint spike, a barely perceptible fluctuation in the background noise. I leaned closer. It was the same signal we'd picked up before, only different. There was a new rhythm to it, a secondary pulse that reverberated through the first. I ran it through the analyzer, isolating the frequencies, and stared in disbelief as a pattern emerged. It was mimicking our attempts to communicate. "Sarah," I called out, my voice hoarse from days of disuse. I hadn't spoken to anyone in what felt like an eternity, lost in the world of data and static. But she was there. She was always there, lingering on the edges, watching me with those worried eyes. She appeared in the doorway, a ghostly figure in the dim light. Her face was thinner, drawn, as if she hadn't been sleeping either. I wondered if she too was feeling it, the pull of the feeder, the irresistible urge to look deeper. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "Listen," I whispered, turning, the speakers up. The signal played softly, a low, haunting hum that seemed to vibrate through the air. It was hypnotic, almost melodic in its complexity, and I felt a strange comfort wash over me as I listened. It was the first time, in weeks, that I didn't feel afraid. "Is that new?" she asked, stepping closer. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "It's responding to us," I finally managed. "Every time we've sent a signal, every time we've tried to analyze it, it's been listening. And now..." I pointed to the screen where the twin pulses throbbed in perfect synchronization. It's mimicking our frequency. It's trying to communicate. Sarah stiffened beside me. Or it's learning. The word sent a shiver through me. Learning, mimicking, adapting. What if it wasn't just responding out of curiosity? What if it was studying us, figuring out what made us tick, the way a predator studies the movements of its prey? What do we do? She whispered. I turned to her, seeing the fear etched in her face, and felt a surge of protectiveness. She was too young for this, too innocent. She didn't deserve to be drawn into the same madness that had ensnared me. We can't stop now, I said softly. We're too close. We need to keep watching, No, she interrupted, shaking her head violently. We need to stop, Timothy. This thing is manipulating us. Can't you feel it? Her voice broke and she grabbed my arm, fingers digging into my flesh. Every time we look at it, every time we send a signal, it's like it's reaching out, like it's wrapping itself around us. I wrenched my arm free, anger and frustration bubbling up. You're overreacting. It's a phenomenon, a discovery. This is what we do, Sarah. We study. We learn. Not this, she murmured, stepping back, her face pale. This isn't science, Timothy. This is... She trailed off, glancing around as if the shadows in the room were listening. It's hungry, the word echoed in the silence, hanging heavy in the air. Hungry. I wanted to laugh, to brush it off as paranoia, but something deep inside me recoiled. Was that what this was? Had we awakened something that shouldn't have been disturbed? Something that was growing stronger the more we probed its secrets? I'm going to talk to Dr. Ramirez, she said suddenly, her voice wavering. This needs to stop. I surged to my feet. No, you can't. She'll shut it all down. We need more time, more... Look at yourself, she cried, eyes blazing. You're falling apart. You don't eat. You don't sleep. You've become a slave to this thing, whatever it is. If we keep going, we'll what? I snarled, fists clenched. We'll understand. We'll finally see. Or we'll go mad, she whispered. The words were soft, barely audible, but they cut through me like a knife. Please, Timothy, let it go. I stared at her, chest heaving, and for a moment, just a moment, I considered walking away, letting the darkness swallow up the feeder and forgetting we ever looked into the abyss. But then the signal pulsed again, throbbing through the room, and my resolve hardened. I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was so close. You do what you want, I muttered, turning back to my laptop. But I'm staying. She was silent for a long time, and I refused to look at her. I couldn't. If I did, I might waver and turn back. I'm sorry, she whispered finally, and I heard the soft click of the door closing behind her. I didn't see her again for 3 days. I kept working, alone in the silent observatory. I slept in my office, surrounded by screens filled with data feeds and looping video of the feeder's dark, undulating mass. I ate when I remembered to, hardly tasting the cold sandwiches and stale coffee I scrounged from the break room. Time, blurred days and nights melding into a single endless vigil, and all the while the feeder watched. It wasn't just paranoia. I could feel it. Every time I adjusted the telescope, every time I narrowed the focus to get a clearer image, it would shift, its tendrils flaring outward, reaching toward the lens. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I knew what I was seeing. It was reacting to me. It was responding. And it was getting closer. The thought made my skin crawl, but I couldn't look away. I stayed glued to the screens, cataloging every flicker, every movement, every tiny variation in the signal's pattern. It was speaking to me, I was sure of it. There was a message buried in the hum, a meaning just beyond my grasp. It was close. So close. Then, on the third night, it happened. I was running the latest batch of images through the analyzer when the signal suddenly spiked, a sharp burst of energy that sent my equipment whirring in alarm. I scrambled to adjust the settings, and watched as the feeder's dark mass seemed to expand, swallowing the star completely. The room vibrated with a low, thrumming hum, the sound reverberating through my skull. I gasped, clutching the edge of the desk, my vision blurring as the signal intensified. It was everywhere, filling the room, the observatory, the entire world. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. I blinked. The screens went dark, the equipment falling silent. I stared at the blank monitors, my mind racing. What the hell just happened? The silence stretched on for what seemed like an eternity. Then, finally, I reached out, trembling fingers, hovering over the keyboard. That's when a single word appeared on the main screen, typed out in stark white letters, "Hello." My blood turned to ice. Part of V bolted upright in my chair, feeling as if the room was closing in around me, and swallowed hard. My eyes remained fixed on the single word glowing on the monitor, "Hello." It was impossible. There was no way it could have sent that message. I must have been hallucinating, sleep-deprived and jittery after days without rest. But as I stared at the screen, my fingers hung over the keyboard, trembling. "Hello?" I whispered. I typed the word into the command line and hit enter, then waited. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The screen remained blank except for the word that shouldn't have been there. Then slowly, letter by letter, a new message appeared beneath it. "Why do you watch?" A shiver ran down my spine. My hand jerked back from the keyboard as if it were a viper. I glanced around the empty room, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. But it was just me, the quiet hum of the computers and the distant rumble of the observatory's ventilation system. It was trying to communicate. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every rational part of me screamed to shut it down, to sever the connection, and destroy every piece of data we had gathered. This was beyond science, and it was madness. Yet somewhere deep inside, curiosity burned brighter than fear, because I didn't just want to know what it was. I wanted to know why. "What are you doing here?" I typed hesitantly, the keys clacking loud in the silence. The response came faster this time, the letters appearing almost instantly. "Feeding." The word sent a chill through me, but I forced myself to continue. "Feeding on stars?" "Yes." "Why?" "To live, to grow." The simplicity of its answer unsettled me. There was no malice, no grand cosmic agenda, just the cold, indifferent instinct of a voracious predator. But something about the way it responded, it was almost conversational, as if it wanted me to understand, as if it craved interaction. "Are you alive?" I asked, my hands sweating. The reply was immediate. "Not as you understand it." My mind reeled. I leaned forward, incredulous. What was I dealing with? A creature, an intelligence? Something that existed outside the boundaries of life as we knew it? I swallowed hard, glancing at the data feeds on the other screens. "Why did you reach out? To us?" This time the pause stretched on for several seconds. When it answered, the response was chillingly simple. "I am hungry." I stared at the screen. Hungry. I had already known that it was feeding on the star, but what if that wasn't the whole story? What if the star was just a means to an end? A lure? A way to attract attention? "What do you want?" I typed slowly. The response made my blood run cold. "To be seen." My mind raced, piecing together the implications. To be seen. It wasn't just feeding on the star, it was broadcasting. It wanted to be observed. And I had fallen right into its trap. My obsession, my relentless need to understand. I had given it exactly what it wanted. I was its prey. I shoved back from the desk, gasping. I had to stop. I had to cut the connection, destroy every trace of this nightmare before it. The monitor flickered, and a new message appeared, freezing me in place. "It is too late." I felt the blood drain from my face. Too late? What did it mean? Had I already triggered something, set some chain of events in motion that couldn't be undone? My thoughts were spiraling, panic clawing at my chest. I scrambled to shut down the systems, but the keyboard was unresponsive. The screens locked on that single damning phrase. Then in one heart-stopping moment, all the monitors blinked off, plunging the room into darkness. I spun around. The entire observatory was silent. The computers were dead, the data feeds blank. I fumbled for the power switch, but it wouldn't turn on. The backup generators didn't kick in. Every system was down, as if the entire network had been consumed. No, 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 I muttered, slamming my hand against the desk. This couldn't be happening. I had to get the data back. I had to. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the walls. I froze. It was the signal. The same rhythmic pulse we'd picked up from the feeder, only now it wasn't coming through the telescope. It was coming from inside the observatory. The floor trembled beneath my feet, the sound growing louder, deeper. I stumbled toward the door, my legs shaking. I needed to get out, to warn the others, but as I reached the exit, the hum stopped. Silence fell. I stood there waiting for something, anything, to happen. The seconds stretched on, each one more agonizing than the last. Then, slowly, the monitors flickered back to life. But they weren't showing data anymore. They were showing stars. My blood ran cold as I stared at the screens. A field of stars, glittering brightly against the backdrop of deep space. And there, at the center of the image, was a cluster of stars formerly neighboring HD 1284. Tiny pinpricks of light suspended in an inky void. But something was wrong. The lights were flickering as if something was distorting them, something between us and the stars. I squinted, leaning closer, and then I saw it. A shadow, vast and serpentine, obstructing the faint glow of the distant suns. And it was moving. Oh God, I cried. It was impossible. It was just light years away. There was no way it could have traversed such a vast expanse so quickly. But there it was, twisting and writhing, its form swelling and swelling until it blotted out the entire screen. It felt as if the darkness itself were reaching for me, extending its tendrils through the monitors, through the cables and wires, right into my mind. The darkness seemed to pulse, a ripple of shadow that echoed through my skull. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I was looking at a screen, and yet I felt it, inside me, smothering my very consciousness. It was like a dream, a half-formed nightmare, but sharper, more vivid. And then suddenly, I was falling. The observatory seemed to blur, the walls warping and shifting. I gasped, clutching the desk, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. The floor beneath me buckled, and I stumbled forward, the darkness swallowing everything. No, 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 I cried. The feeder's shadow engulfed me, enveloping my thoughts, squeezing tighter. Sharp, searing pain lanced through me. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the void. You looked. The words penetrated my skull, soft and mocking, no longer confined to a screen. The feeder wasn't here, and not physically, not yet at least. It didn't need to be. It was in my head, projecting itself through the signal, hijacking my inner monologue. I was trapped, lost in the dark, a prisoner in my own mind. Now I feed. The pain erupted, a white-hot flash that tore through my central nervous system. I thrashed in protest, but the darkness pressed tighter, suffocating. It was tearing me apart, unraveling my sanity, my identity. And then, abruptly, it released me. I collapsed to the floor, my head spinning. Slowly the darkness receded. The world, blurring back into focus. I peered at the nearby screens. They were still blank, but the hunger remained. I was back in the observatory, the real physical observatory, but my body and mind felt wrong, violated, as if the boundaries between what was real and what was imagined had begun to fray. Somewhere in the core of my being, a nagging, incessant Sensation persisted. My thoughts were jumbled, fragmented. The feeder had been inside me that I was sure of, but it had done more than just explore. It had tasted me, and it wasn't finished yet. Before I had a chance to so much as consider the implications, I was interrupted. "Timothy," a voice whispered. I looked up, blinking through the haze of pain. Sarah was standing in the doorway, her face ashen and haggard. Cautiously, she took a step forward, her eyes first darting to the screens, then to me, and back again. I saw her. Lips moved, but the words were muffled, as if I were hearing them through a layer of thick glass. What happened?" she asked. My voice was hoarse, barely more than a rasp. I struggled to my feet, clutching the edge of the desk for support. It's inside the signal. It found a way to..." I broke off, shaking, my head violently. None of it made sense. How could I explain what I'd just experienced? How could I make her understand that I wasn't going insane, that the entity wasn't just something out there in the depths of space? It was here, and it was feeding on us now, using the same signal I had obsessed over for days. "We have to shut it down," I said finally, my voice trembling. "All of it. The observatory, the servers, everything. It's using the equipment as a gateway. We're making it stronger." Sarah's face tightened, a flicker of anger sparking in her eyes. "You did this," she whispered, taking a step back. "You kept pushing, kept digging. I told you to stop, but you wouldn't listen, and now..." "I'm sorry," I choked out. "Please, Sarah, I didn't know." But even as I spoke, I realized that wasn't entirely true. I had known. On some level, I had wanted this. Wanted to make contact, to pierce the veil between observer and observed. I had ignored the warnings and dismissed the fear, because the hunger for knowledge had been stronger, and now we were paying the price. "We have to go," I insisted, pushing past the pain and the lingering sensation of the feeder's presence in my mind. "We have to get out of here before..." A loud crack echoed through the observatory, cutting me off. The floor shuddered, the walls vibrating. I stood, paralyzed, as the monitors flickered back to life. The same image appeared on every screen, the former location of HD 1284, now engulfed by the vast coiling darkness of the feeder. But the entity's form was different now. Its shape was warping, rippling like a mirage. Tendrils of shadow stretched outward, twisting and curling in impossible patterns. It wasn't just reacting to the telescope's gaze anymore, it was mirroring something, mirroring me. "What the hell is it doing?" Sarah cried, taking another step back. "I don't know," I whispered, staring in horrified fascination as the entity continued to shift and writhe. It was mimicking my movements, echoing every twitch of my hands, every shift of my weight. And then, as I watched, it began to solidify, coalescing into a darker, denser shape, a humanoid shape. "Oh God," I blurted out, stumbling backward. It couldn't be real. It was just an image on a screen, a trick of light and shadow. But as I stared, I felt the presence in my mind pulse, a sharp, invasive pressure that made my skull throb. It wasn't just copying me, it was trying to become me. "What are you?" I whispered, not even sure who I was speaking to. The feeder, the shadow on the screen, or the echo of its voice still whispering in the corners of my mind. The response came, a soft, mocking murmur that seemed to vibrate through the air itself. "You know." I recoiled. It wasn't a voice, not really. More like an impression, a sense of meaning that bypassed language entirely. And in that moment, I understood. The feeder wasn't just a predator. It consumed not just matter and energy, but the very essence of those it encountered. It had fed on innumerable stars, countless worlds, and now it was feeding on me. Using the signal as a conduit, it was attempting to mimic, overwrite, and replace me the same way it had consumed the light and mass of HD 1284. And if it succeeded, it wouldn't stop with me. What does it want?" Sarah asked, her voice thin and strained. "What is it doing?" "It's trying to come through," I whispered. It's using the signal, the telescope. It's The words died in my throat as the image on the screen moved. The shadowy form of the feeder twisted, and then, impossibly, one of its tendrils pressed against the inside of the monitor's glass. "No," I cried, taking a step back. "No, it can't." The glass began to bulge, the surface warping, outward as if something were pressing against it from the other side. A faint crack appeared at the edge of the monitor, spreading in a jagged line across the screen. I stumbled backward, shaking my head violently. "It's not real," I whispered frantically. "It's just a projection, The glass shattered. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the deafening roar of static that filled the room. Darkness erupted from the broken monitor, a writhing mass of shadow and smoke. It swirled around me, cold and suffocating, coiling around my arms, legs, and throat. "Let me in." The voice was everywhere, a desperate, ravenous whisper that clawed at my mind. I thrashed wildly, but it was like being smothered in frigid ash. Tighter, still it pressed, the pressure building in my skull. And then suddenly it stopped. I blinked, gasping, and realized I was on the floor again, the monitors dark and lifeless. The broken glass had vanished without a trace. The darkness was gone. Beside me, Sarah stared, wide-eyed, a look of pure horror on her face. "Timothy," she whispered, her voice shaking. What just happened?" I looked down at my hands, at the faint, dark tendrils that still lingered around my fingertips, fading like wisps of smoke. The feeder hadn't broken through, but it had left a part of itself inside me. I began, but the words caught in my throat. What could I even say? It all seemed futile, pointless. Across from me, the monitors lit up once more. I cast a glance at them and nearly choked. The distant stars were still blinking out. All of them, one by one with increasing rapidity, and I knew with a sickening certainty that it wasn't just the feeder anymore. There were others, untold others drifting through the void, drawn to the beacon I had unwittingly activated. They were coming, and they were all hungry. The observatory was silent except for the hum, that deep, rhythmic vibration that pulsed in the walls, the floor, my chest. It wasn't merely mechanical, it was alive, as like the heartbeat of a vast, unknowable predator. It thrummed with a life all its own. I stood frozen, staring at the monitors, at Sarah's wide, terrified eyes, and at the void where the stars had been. My mind churned with anxiety. We had to do something, but every instinct told me that it was already too late. The feeder itself had told me as much. What position was I in to question something so vast and powerful? "Timothy," Sarah whispered, clutching my arm. Her voice was trembling, her nails digging into my skin. "They're coming, aren't they?" "No," I said, my voice hollow. "They're already here." I didn't need to look back at the screens to know it. The feeder and its kind had crossed whatever incomprehensible distance separated us, drawn by the signal I had foolishly amplified. I had lured them, beckoned them with my obsession, and now we were being hunted. My thoughts spiraled. Every possible action felt useless. They weren't creatures that could be fought or reasoned with. They weren't even bound by the same rules of existence. They were a heartless, calculating force of nature. And yet, some desperate part of me refused to give in. "We have to sever the signal," I said suddenly, turning toward the central console. My voice was sharp now, a forced steadiness cutting through the rising panic. "If we can break the connection, maybe what?" Sarah snapped, her fear giving way to anger. "Maybe they'll leave. Maybe they'll just forget about us. You don't even know if that's possible." "No, I don't," I admitted, meeting her gaze. "But I have to try. You saw what they did to the star. If they make it here..." I swallowed hard. "It's not just us, Sarah. It's everyone. Everything." She hesitated, her anger fading as the weight of my words sank in. Then, reluctantly, she nodded. We worked quickly, moving through the observatory with an urgency that bordered on hysteria. Every monitor showed the same terrible image. The void, vast and all-consuming, coiling and writhing as the feeder's shadow spread. It was no longer just one entity. Faint outlines in the darkness hinted at others, distant but closing. And the hum grew louder as we shut down systems one by one, each click of a switch a small victory against the mounting dread. But the deeper we went, the more the feeder pushed back. The monitors flickered and flared, the images distorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe and twist in mockery of human forms. The hum became a roar, vibrating through my skull, and I felt the presence in my mind again. You cannot hide. The words weren't spoken. They were felt, a resonant force pulsing through my being. I staggered, clutching the console for support, my vision swimming. Sarah shouted something, but her voice was drowned out by the roar. The darkness on the monitors swelled, the tendrils, approaching the edges of the screens, and I realized with dawning horror that it wasn't just an image. It was here. "Timothy!" Sarah's voice cut through the din, sharp and panicked. "We've lost control of the main system. The signal's still broadcasting." "No!" I gasped, stumbling toward the central terminal. My hands shook as I typed, but the commands were ignored. The console's lights flickered wildly, the hum growing deeper, louder. The feeder was in the system, entwined with the signal itself, and no matter how many systems we shut down, the connection remained. "Timothy." "We have to leave!" Sarah grabbed my arm, trying to pull me away, but I shook her off. "There's one more thing we can try," I said, my voice a desperate rasp. "The antenna array. If we can destroy the transmitter—" "Destroy it?" She interrupted, her eyes wide. "You can't be serious. That's millions of dollars in—" "Sarah, listen to me," I shouted, rounding on her. "It doesn't matter anymore. If we don't stop the signal, they'll keep coming. You've seen what they are, what they do. Do you think money means anything to them?" She hesitated, her expression torn between fear and determination. Then finally, she nodded. The wind howled as we stepped out onto the observatory's rooftop, the cold biting through my jacket. Above us, the sky was black, not the soft, star-dappled black of a normal night, but an impenetrable void. The stars were gone, eclipsed by the approaching shadows. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. The antenna tower loomed ahead, its skeletal frame silhouetted against the darkness. It was the heart of the observatory's transmission system, the link between Earth and the cosmos. If we could destroy it, we might sever the signal. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. "Hurry!" Sarah urged, her voice tight. She was carrying the toolbox we'd grabbed on our way up, her hands trembling as she fumbled for the cutters. "We don't have much time." I didn't respond. My focus was on the antenna, on the cables that snaked down its length. Each one was a lifeline to the telescope, a thread that needed to be cut. I reached for the first cable, but my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely grip it. "Let me," Sarah said, stepping in. She worked quickly, cutting through the thick insulation with a precision that belied her fear. One by one, the cables fell away, the hum from the observatory fading with each severed connection. But it wasn't enough. As Sarah reached for the final cable, the roar returned, louder than ever. The air around us seemed to vibrate, the darkness above swirling furiously. I staggered back, clutching my head as the feeder's presence surged through me. "There is no escape." The voice was deafening, a cacophony of whispers and screams that filled my mind. My vision blurred, the world tilting as the feeder's shadow pressed nearer. Dark tendrils coiled toward us, reaching down from the void, and I realized with sickening clarity that it wasn't just here for the signal. It was here for me. "Sarah," I shouted, forcing myself to stand. "Cut it! Cut the last cable!" She hesitated, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. "What about you?" "Just do it!" I screamed. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and swung the cutters. The final cable snapped with a sharp crack and the hum stopped. The roar faded, the air stilling as the transmission was silenced. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, and then the darkness exploded. Shadowy tendrils surged in my direction, enveloping me in an instant, cutting off my air and blinding me. I screamed, the pressure crushing me. I felt the feeder's presence inside me again, tearing through my thoughts and unraveling my identity. Piece by piece it consumed me and I couldn't stop it. But I could feel something else too. The connection weakening, the feeder's grip faltering. The severed signal had disrupted its hold, breaking the link that had allowed it to reach us. I clung to that thought, to the faint hope that I might still escape. With a final, desperate scream, I tore myself free. The tendrils recoiled, the darkness retreating. I collapsed onto the rooftop, struggling to breathe, my body trembling. The sky above was still black, but the hum was gone and the presence in my mind had faded. Timothy. Sarah's voice was distant. She knelt beside me, panic-stricken, her hands on my shoulders, and shook me. "Are you okay? Say something." I think it worked," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "The signal's gone." We stopped, but as I looked up at the sky, at the impenetrable void where the stars had been, I felt no relief. The feeder was still out there, and it wasn't alone. I could feel them, faint and distant, watching, waiting. We sat in the wreckage of the observatory, surrounded by the silence we had fought so hard to reclaim. The droning sounds were gone, and the oppressive presence of the feeder had retreated. But the stars above remained conspicuously absent. The rooftop was littered with severed cables and shards of broken equipment. The antenna tower stood silent, its purpose rendered obsolete by our sabotage. Sarah sat beside me, her face streaked with tears. Neither of us spoke. It wasn't over. I could feel it. The feeder's shadow had left a mark, not just on the observatory, but on me. My mind felt fractured, haunted by its intrusions. When I closed my eyes, I could still see the tendrils and feel the horrifying extent of its hunger. It hadn't fully consumed me, but it had taken something invaluable I couldn't quite name, and which I might never get back. "Timothy," Sarah said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was raw, hoarse from screaming. Do you think it's really gone?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. I didn't know. The feeder wasn't like anything we had ever encountered. It wasn't bound by the same rules or logic. It didn't need the signal to reach us. The signal had been a convenience, a draw. Now that it knew we existed, what would stop it from returning? "I don't know," I admitted finally, my voice hollow. "But I don't think it matters." She turned to me, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I gestured to the sky, to the emptiness where the stars should have been. "Look at it. It's not just the feeder. There are others out there. We saw them. They're coming." She followed my gaze, her face pale in the dim light. The endless, expansive space seemed sinister now, as if the absence of stars were a harbinger of something far worse. "How do you know?" she whispered. "I can feel them," I said, my voice trembling. "Ever since the feeder got inside me. It's like they left a door open. And now..." I broke off, struggling to find the words. "They're watching us, biding their time." Sarah shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Then what was the point?" she asked bitterly. "If they're still coming, if we're all just prey to them, then why did we even fight?" "Because we had to," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Because maybe we bought ourselves time. Maybe that's all we can do." She didn't respond, and for a long while we did nothing but sit in silence. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be okay. But I couldn't bring myself to lie, not after what we had witnessed. By morning, the authorities had arrived. The observatory was swarmed with technicians, scientists, and government agents, their faces grim as they surveyed the damage. I watched from the sidelines as they examined the severed cables, the destroyed equipment, the shattered monitors. Sarah stood beside me, her expression unreadable. "What do we tell them?" she asked quietly. "The truth," I said, though the words felt like a lead weight in my mouth. "We tell them what we saw, what we did." She glanced at me, her eyes searching. "And you think they'll believe us?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We both knew the truth. They wouldn't believe us. Not really. They'd write it off as a technical malfunction, a breakdown in protocol. The idea of something like the feeder, something vast, predatory, and intelligent, was too terrifying to accept. They'd bury it, just like they'd buried every other unexplainable event in human history. But it wouldn't matter. Not in the end. I gave my report to a man in a dark suit with a face that betrayed nothing. He asked questions, taking notes in a black leather-bound book, his pen scratching softly against the paper. I told him everything. The discovery of the anomaly, the signals, the feeder's presence. I described the way it had invaded my mind, the way it had reached through the signal to make contact. I told him about the other shadows we had seen, the countless shapes moving in the void. When I finished, he closed the notebook and stared at me for a long moment. His expression was unreadable, his eyes cold. "And you're certain of this?" he asked finally. "Yes," I said, though my voice wavered. "I know how it sounds, but you have to believe me. They're coming. That will be all, Dr. Cole," he interrupted, his tone flat. "We'll take it from here." I wanted to argue, to plead, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. They didn't want to understand what we were facing, and in the end, it didn't matter. The feeder and its kind would come, whether humanity was ready or not. Sarah and I left the observatory together, walking down the winding road that led into the valley below. The air was crisp and cold, the sky above still empty. I stared at the horizon, my mind heavy with thoughts of what lay beyond it. The stars were still gone. Would they ever return? Or had we already lost the night sky? To the shadows that lurked beyond it, I realized it wouldn't be long before everyone else noticed. They had to. Then there would be global panic, questions and no answers, lies and cover-ups, official explanations. Then there would be unrest, violence, and terror. And finally, perhaps as reality reared its ugly head, cold and stark acceptance of humanity's true position in the universe. "Timothy," Sarah said softly, breaking the silence, "do you think they'll come for us?" "Yes," I said, not looking at her. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they'll come." She didn't respond, and for a long time we walked in silence. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a faint, distant hum that sent a shiver down my spine. I knew it wasn't real. It was a product of my mind, forever haunted by what I'd experienced, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. The feeder had left its mark, and I would carry it with me for the rest of my life. That night I stood outside my home, doing my best to process everything that had transpired. Somewhere out there, in the vast infinite expanse of our galaxy, a predator, ravenous beyond measure, lied in wait, indifferent to the desires of man. I did the only thing I could think of in that moment. Staring at the empty, starless sky, I mourned the loss of everything I had held dear and everyone I had ever loved, and I wept. It's beautiful, isn't it, your sun? This gargantuan orb of blazing fury that dominates the clear skies. Its sheer intensity and raw power are matched only by its cosmic beauty. As well as this, its ability to marvel is matched by its ability to terrify, for indeed I am moved to tears of dread when the day breaks. I must admit I've been curious as to why so many of you I see associate the cloudy days or the darkness with evil or despair. At the same time, though, I understand, for you would not have seen true despair, true horror, as I have. You have not yet seen the whims of an unstoppable force strip everything you knew away from you before your very eyes. Not as you are now, at least. Indeed, this is a different breed of beings than what I remember. A different age. But you are still beings of flesh all the same. None of you will remember that day. The day when the skies went dark and all looked to the sky, not in wonder but in fear. The day when our native lands were consumed, forever ceasing to exist. Moreover, you don't remember how we tried to warn you and foretold the end, how we only wanted to help you, and how you slaughtered us for it. You won't remember, because you would never be allowed to remember. It doesn't allow you to remember. It, the last child and creator of the flesh, created you all to be different from what you were before. I must admit this always made me curious. Why would it continuously recreate a different world than what it once knew? Perhaps, I've thought, it is trying to camouflage this new world, as if doing so might allow it to hide from the inevitable. I understand that much of this will be difficult for you to comprehend. As I've said, it keeps you all in blissful ignorance. It wants you all to live without knowing the horrors that came before. It also sees me and my kind as evil. It has always seen us as responsible for the devastation of our native lands before, the long-since non-existent worlds of a bygone era, a damned epoch. It is for this reason that I fear much of what I say now will fall upon deaf ears. You won't remember as it does that it was we who made this world's existence possible. It was we who ferried it across the cosmos and brought it here to rebuild and thrive anew. You won't know yet of the terror I know it feels even now, the terror we both feel. You may be wondering exactly who I am and why I tell you this. To answer your first question, I go by many names. Each of you seems to have a unique perception of what I and my kind are. In some ways, I am what some of you have taken to calling an angel. To others, I am what is collectively known as a demon. And to the more primitive, I am simply an alien, emanating from beyond. I suppose the most accurate way to describe what I am would be to refer to me as a foreigner from the dark beyond. I, however, consider myself, as I did back then on Andromeda, to be a messenger. A Sibyl, as you might know it, comes so that you may all remember, as I do, as it does, the lost ages of Andromeda. Much like here with this galaxy, Andromeda also bore bright burning suns that cast their light all through the cosmos. There were 3 of them, each rotating in an eternal cycle. Because of this, night did not exist on any of the Andromedan worlds. The skies were always beautifully illuminated with the different spectral auroral rays corresponding to each sun. That was always the crown of Andromeda's beauty. How such beauty would spawn from such a force as it, the starving one, chaos, the beginning and the end, whose 8 limbs silently scream in the pain of eternal hunger, has always perplexed me. But such as it was, we all would be spawned from it. My kind was torn directly from its cloth as its descendants, unlike you and all others whom developed more uniquely. My native world rested in the very center of Andromeda's core, always warmed by the sun's ultraviolet rays. This world we knew by the name of Null. It was our home, the home of those that descend from the beginning and the end itself. And on Null, we thrived among our own as a community, much as you did then, and do now. We, like you, built mighty structures for shelter, community, and worship. Though while I've noticed that you all of this era, this breed, seem to worship any being or force that you would deem as unnatural or unknown, we had one, and one alone who we knelt to, one whom we feared, and it was all too known. To us, the gluttonous star itself, Chaos. It was Chaos that first brought forth the cosmos and who first penetrated the eternal dark with the birth of light. It was Chaos that produced the vast innumerable worlds and the creatures that walk upon them, and which would be the end of all of this. I suppose in these and a few other ways, I and my kind perhaps aren't so alien to you after all. All who inhabited Andromeda's worlds acted in this manner, all bowing only to the gluttonous star. This tireless devotion would prove to be our folly as well, for as I've watched how you all would, in various ways, attempt to placate or appease those which you kneel to, we too thought we could prolong our lives in this manner. At the center of each Andromedan world was a place of worship to the star with some effigy either carved or erected, whether crudely or adeptly in its image. On Null it was a mere carving upon the ground at the planet's center, a cavernous pit and within it representing the great maw at its core from which creation was born. I remember how, for nearly a millennium, at the dawning of each sun's apex, a different sun would poise itself directly overhead, and the nulling ceremony would be observed. We would all gather around the carving, standing about its outline, and we would shriek uniformly to the cosmos with each of our 5 mouths. One was always selected to cast themselves into the pit as an offering, as our means of giving back that which the star lost in our creation. What we wouldn't understand until it was far too late was that our God was not one that could be served, only feared. It would have us all in the end, regardless of our devotion or sacrifice. For the gluttonous star, chaos, is inevitability itself, the supreme force of nature throughout the cosmos, and all are but mere nourishment, existing only as such as it roams the vast outer dark. It was when the second sun had reached its apex that day that we realized the horrific truth that we had gathered for our second nulling ritual. I remember how beautiful that sun's scarlet aura was, beaming across Knoll's sandy, colorless terrain. In my eyes, the second sun had always been the most beautiful among our three. It would be with terror and sorrow that I would watch so, much as a shadow eclipse its beauty. There Chaos stood, looming above us all, silhouetted against the sun, forever shrouding the land, for the first and last time, in complete darkness. I still hear my people's shrieks of horror when everything we'd constructed over the past millennium began to crumble. The first thing I felt when I looked up to the beautiful scarlet bleached sky and beheld our maker for the first time was the terrain shaking violently. I remember the violet glow of its maw as the planet's terrain was uprooted, taken into, and greedily consumed by it, taking it forever into oblivion. While doing this, I saw how its multitudinous arms writhed frantically, as if in excitement or relief, each of its mouths opening wider with soundless agony and desperation. More than this, I can never forget how our collective cries, pervasive and dominating as they were, fell upon no ears when we began to be quickly drawn into the abysmal maw. When I see the sun rise, I still see each of their faces when they reached and screamed out to me for salvation before they were ripped into the sky and engulfed, ceasing to exist. That was the day when all of Andromeda would know that salvation and prosperity was only a false hope. Once the star had null, I and the small handful that had found a way to flee dispersed to whatever world we thought might serve as a refuge. What safety we thought this would buy us, I cannot say. We were naive. The gluttonous star with its ravenous ire was impatient. I watched with every passing second as more of Andromeda's worlds were helplessly pulled into its maw and devoured, just as Null was. Before long, few worlds remained. With this, we realized Andromeda was lost and changed our objective. With each world we could set upon, instead of seeking refuge, we would always use the knowledge of our oncoming doom to warn the native inhabitants to flee. We felt that if we could not save Andromeda, then we could at least preserve its legacy in a new galaxy. Many believed us, trusted our judgments, and took to the stars as we had. Though the number which actually managed to escape the end, I cannot say, for we had seen far too many still be helplessly taken by chaos. I suppose that if there are any out among the vast cosmos that did survive that horrid day, that they have sought abandoned or untenanted moons to hide upon. I must admit that I've gazed upon the sky at night and wondered how many of the once numerous beautiful natives of Andromeda still live. I know only of one people that surely does, as my kind were instrumental in ensuring their survival, though not without facing another horror ourselves, the horror of genocide. With most of the other worlds either abandoned or consumed by the gluttonous star, we quickly set upon the last world we knew to still contain life. Your original home, Derma's, the world of the flesh. It was what you would all call a grotesque hellscape, with its terrain of living primordial flesh. Grotesque as it may have been, it was your home nonetheless, and I remembered beholding the creatures of flesh for the first time. The ways in which I watched them conduct themselves, as well as their unique attributes as a whole, were what your breed of fleshlings would see as primal, and would no doubt find horrifying to behold. I must admit, however, that I was not horrified. Given that by then I'd long since become numb to common atrocities and the bizarre, I was more curious of the nature of these creatures than anything. I suppose primal isn't an altogether inaccurate description of them. Indeed, of all the beings of Andromeda's worlds, it was your kind that stood out the most. From the manners in which they all mindlessly shambled upon their native soil, grazing and milling blindly about and occasionally even consuming themselves for nourishment, to the way in which I watched each creature adapt to its terrain and conditions, these beings were in every way the most unique and strange. More than this, I saw that these beings, unlike those of the other worlds, didn't bear any knowledge of architecture or community. There were none of the monolithic monuments, or spires such as what we had on Null, and none of the aquatic domes that defied gravity as on Hydrock. Not even the spectral pylons of light from Elec, or the fungal growth huts on Botan. Even the ways in which the fleshlings communicated were unique from any other, having a form of articulate speech as opposed to the screeches and howls that other creatures of Andromeda used. They didn't seem to congregate or live in groups. Instead, they chose to live independently from another, minding only themselves. Simply put, you were the most primitive creatures in all of Andromeda, and yet, you were also the most free. Perhaps that was what intrigued me about you the most. In all respects, these creatures were the most underdeveloped compared to the rest, but at the same time you all were the most peaceful in a manner of speaking. You knew nothing yet of reverence or fear, for I observed that you hadn't, as the rest of us had, bowed to any sort of image of the gluttonous star. Simply put, your kind were tranquil and serene, peaceful in a way none could fathom. Maybe in a certain sense my kind really is guilty then. We would introduce the concept of terror to you for the first time with our warnings of what was coming. In doing this, we stripped you of your freedom, and for that I will ask that we be someday forgiven. We told many of them, urging them to flee by showing them visions of the coming doom. They, however, seemed to take this as an act of hostility, adamantly believing us to be some sort of a beacon to the star that was hailing it. They believed we were leading them to their end, to damnation, rather than to salvation. It was this misguided fear that drove them to violence. No matter the innocence of our plans, and regardless of our pleas of mercy, their wrath was guaranteed. Again heard the screeches of the suffering of my kind as they fell, soaking the fleshy soil in their blood. Everywhere spanning Derma's beautifully scarlet-bleached horizon, I saw nothing short of utter carnage unfold. Some I saw were ripped limb from limb, slowly and painfully torn apart, while others were impaled through their cores with the creature's long, curved talons. We were outnumbered, weakened, and hopelessly outmatched against them, and it wasn't long before the already small number of us had dwindled to only a handful. I myself almost succumbed to this gruesome fate when, in attempt to flee for whatever haven I could find, one of them had caught me and cast me upon the soil like I was waste, and viciously tore me open. Just when I was about to resign myself to my fate, however, I noticed the casting of an all-too-familiar shadow, followed by a violet glow. That was when true terror flooded through me again as the foundation of the planet shook and quaked, just as it had on Null. When I looked to the sky, I witnessed my attacker being forced into the cavernous maw above. Though I couldn't see it, on his face as I had my kin on Null, for these creatures bore no faces. The frenzied flailing of his naked, gangly arms said it all. It was afraid, and it then realized we only wanted to help. Alas, it was all too soon that the sky was filled with them, thousands of fleshlings frantically thrashing while being drawn into the sky and digested by the void, joining the fate of the other inhabitants of Andromeda. I would have resigned myself to this same destiny, having now seen devastation for a second time and feeling every bit of the weight of this failure, if I'd not seen it, the birth of a new flesh child. It was something that might have been overlooked in any other circumstance, but all the same I saw it for what it was, a last chance for redemption. Weak and battered, I struggled to make my way over to the newly born creature. The few that remained urged me to flee with them, to save ourselves and abandon the planet to its fate. I, however, remained adamant and steadfast in my goal to preserve at least a fragment of our lost age. Using what little strength I still possessed, I began, with the aid of the others, to ferry this newborn flesh child away from the dying world and into the outer dark. Nearing the edge of Andromeda's borders, I looked back to see those 3 beautiful suns being slowly devoured. That, I think, was the very first time I cried. In mere hours, I'd witnessed abject desolation, the end of life, and beauty. Yet, here I was, now carrying one last seed to bear a new generation. I know not how long we roamed the cosmos, nor could I recall how we first came upon your present galaxy. In truth, my primary objective was simply to find refuge somewhere as far away from Andromeda as possible. Somewhere where perhaps the gluttonous star wouldn't soon follow. I suppose, though, deep down, I always knew and feared that it would, one day, find us. In spite of this, I thought that we would at least buy this new generation of civilizations a better chance of survival by starting anew in a place hidden as deeply in the vast cosmic void as possible. Eventually, we found just such a virgin galaxy uninhabited and uncorrupted by any creature or force before. In its center was the large, beautiful sun that sets even as I record this. Around it were 7 worlds, 3 of which were encircled by large rings of vapor and rock. We reasoned this was our safest haven, for it was far from the reaches of Andromeda, and would perhaps be outside the range of the gluttonous star for a time at least. We ventured into it until finally, our strength waned and we released this last flesh child into the cosmos. Our physical bodies at last began to ebb away, dissolving into a cluster of spectral vapors. Before this was able to fully take effect, we were able to join together and form an entirely new cosmic body, unifying as the Ga-Ast, the moon that lives. From this new form, we watched as the child awoke from its catatonic state and began forming, from its own flesh, a brand new world where none had existed before, in its own image. Though this would not be entirely the same world it knew before. I watched as it would birth creatures similar to, though not entirely representative of, the other civilizations of Andromeda. Now that I think of it, perhaps that may yet be why its acts of creation differ from that of Derma's. What was more astounding to me was when I saw the fleshling then begin to somehow use the primordial flesh to mold a new landscape of lush green soil, similar to the green fungal world of Botan. As well as this, I saw that it was combining it with the crystalline blue water I'd remembered seeing on Hydrock. At the sight of this, my kind were not just curious, but astonished. How was it able to create such things that it could never have known? Perhaps through some latent memory or instinct, it too sought to preserve a fragment of the lost age from where it first came. The first of these creatures I remember were those gargantuan beasts your breed later deemed dinosaurs. Large, mindless animals that reminded me much of the scaly dwellers of the dark and cavernous world of Ra-Aptar. Unlike them, however, their mannerisms were much less sophisticated, behaving much more similarly to their own native behaviors, prone to mindless primal actions. For a time, this was how the new world lived, as a fragmented amalgamation, a shell, of lost worlds. Over time, I saw how more and more new creatures would be introduced from the primordial flesh. Most of them were strange new variants of the more bestial natives of the former planet Dermas, these newborns being formed with proper skin, unlike their former nakedness on Dermas. Of course, the pinnacle of these newborn variations of fleshlings were your kind human beings themselves. I remember how shocked I and the others of the Gast were upon beholding this marvelous development. These creatures, though reminiscent of their Andromedan creator in shape and figure, were something entirely novel. They were an extension, an evolution or maturity of the primitive Derma's natives. Furthermore, these new creatures possessed a capacity for higher thought and for reasoning. It wasn't long before I witnessed them construct their own dwellings, something they could never have known to do before. More than just this, however, I watched you even begin devising images of worship, just as we had on Andromeda. That's when I would realize for the first time what this new civilization, this new world, was. Our efforts had not in fact been in vain. Your kind was the living single embodiment of Andromeda, the combined tapestry of every aspect of peoples long non-existent. I watched as you all gathered, just as we had, performing your various ceremonies, each of them different from one tribal faction to the next, and still you all remained as a blind people. For even in your practices, despite your devotion and fascination with higher powers, you failed to acknowledge the one most powerful of all. You produced countless theologies across many eras of civilizations, and not one of your religions considered the gluttonous star. Because of this, you remained a peaceful people just as you were on Dermas. For eons, we simply observed you from afar. We, the Gaast, have watched you evolve from the very beginning, and we coexisted in this manner harmoniously. But as with all harmony, as was realized back on Andromeda, there must at last come a bitter end. And it is for this reason, as with every occasion before, that I beseech you now. I know not how long it was when we felt it, because we natives of Null were direct descendants of the star, cut directly from its cloth. We feel its presence when it draws near. We did eons before when it took Null, and we do now as it continues to do so. It is for this reason that we've arrived at this present moment, because our new cosmic bond would not allow us an individual form to walk upon you with as we had. On Dermas, we've always resorted to calling from afar to those that would listen, beckoning them to spread our warning. On certain occasions, such as I am now doing, we would assume control of one of you in order to communicate directly. In both instances, the results are the same. The fleshling, your creator, always seeks to destroy us as his people did eons before, by forcing you to turn your aggression upon each other as a means of indirectly attacking us. For in his eyes we are, have been, and always will be a menace, the harbingers of oblivion. He will never know of our efforts in saving him, nor will he allow you to be influenced in any fashion by my kind, or by any our prophecies. This is why I now cry, for I believe that the end is soon upon us, and this time there will be no way that I or any other can save you. I leave this world now with this advice: look not to the sun for beauty, look not to the sky for hope. For all that will come from the sky is terror at the end of all things. I can feel it now, the gluttonous star, drawing ever closer through the vast outer dark. It's starving, as it always has. I can feel its hunger as clearly as I feel the sun's warmth through this vessel of flesh. The sun, how beautiful, and yet so haunting. And so I leave you with this warning. Do with it what you may, and know that I have done everything I can and yet fallen short. And for this I am sorry, so very sorry. Come on, Private, get this damn thing open. Private Edmund almost didn't hear his commander. His focus was trained solely on the door in front of him. The nitro cutter was almost halfway through the thick steel door of the ship's eastern sector. He almost couldn't even hear it, despite it being an alarmingly loud device. Behind him was a cacophonous mixture of bestial growling and the rapid discharging of the commander's plasma rifle. The growling was getting closer and closer. Edmund, goddammit, how long till we're through the door? It's breaching, sir, shouted the private. He could hear one of the growling beasts bound through the air, primed to pounce on. Both of them. Their fortune hadn't run out, though, as Commander Rathburn would be damned if any of this rabid, scaly scum, as he so often loved calling them, were going to make it past him without being barbecued by his rifle. It's cut through. Okay, now how long's it going to take for you to get the damn thing open? I don't know, sir. Not good enough, Private. I'm low on power, and I've only got one more battery after this one. I'm trying, sir. Well, try harder, the commander barked. Edmund rolled his eyes and gritted his teeth. Even putting the full force of his weight on the drill, the laser was still only gradually penetrating the layers in the door. It was likely going to be at least another minute and a half, maybe even 2. God forbid, before they'd have a large enough hole carved out for the two of them to be able to access the escape pod on the other side. Unfortunately, from the sound of things going on behind him, the scaly warriors from the planet Raptar weren't planning to give him the time he needed. He almost dropped the drill altogether when one of the beasts from behind him emitted the most ear-splitting screech possible. He was, of course, quickly silenced by Commander Rathburn's furious plasma fire. "Edmund," he shouted, "I'm on my last battery here. How's that door coming?" "I'm reaching the halfway point. I need another 30 seconds tops. Just give me 30 more seconds. Tell them that," replied the commander anxiously as he turned and resumed firing a fresh hailstorm of plasma upon the hulking beasts charging at him at ramming speed. One after another, reptilian bodies dropped dead, piling atop each other to the point where a wall of corpses was forming. Even still, they charged, unimpeded and unintimidated, and more ravenous than ever. Rathburn saw the red, beady eyes of another immediately take the place of each one he dropped. Some of them he could see were still covered in spatters of blood, the blood of the members of his platoon, one of which was his son. "God, Ryan," the commander mourned. "I'm so sorry." One after another, he stood firm, spraying plasma fire as if it were water from a sprinkler, showering and frying anything he saw, which wasn't much to his credit. Outside of large, scaly bodies, he'd fry the entire ship, including himself and everyone else alive, so long as each and every one of their attackers were dragged straight to hell with him, so he could get another piece of them there. One of them, a rather nimble beast compared to his Herculean brethren, bobbed and weaved past the commander's line of fire until finally he was within range to pounce on him. Rathburn had just enough time to see the creature charge at him from the right before he was tackled and pinned to the ground. The weapon was thrown from his hands. On the ground, Rathburn's strength was completely occupied with keeping the beast's jaws from tearing his head from his shoulders. Private Edmund saw this and saw that the rifle was only a foot and a half away from him. The bad news was, it took at least 2 hands and his full strength to maintain the progress he'd been making cutting through the door. If he let go now, it'd be almost impossible to prime the drill before another wave of beasts barraged them. He could already hear the second wave charging down the halls, blood-drunk and snarling. The commander's strength was quickly failing him, and it wasn't long before the beast's jaws were fastened around his shoulder, his brachial artery taking the brunt of the damage. Rathburn's wail of agony echoed above even the roars and snarls of the approaching onslaught. "Commander!" cried Private Edmund. The scaly beast looked up from his prey to regard him. Edmund's eyes went white as his heart froze. What could he do? He had no weapon, and he couldn't make for the discarded plasma rifle. He was defenseless. Just as the beast reared back to spearhead him, it found, to its shock, that Rathburn, though bleeding profusely and weakened dramatically, still had the strength to hold the beast back. He grappled with the creature, fastening his arms around its throat and his legs around its waist, before throwing himself backward, taking them both back to the floor. For a moment, Edmund remained frozen, petrified with shock. The dying commander regarded him thoughtfully. Rathburn could no longer speak, but all the same, Edmund imagined the voice of his leather-lunged commander shouting, "Do it! Get to the escape pods and get the hell out of here! That's an order!" The beast was bucking and fighting wildly, and it wasn't long before it became clear that he wasn't going to be able to keep hold much longer. At last, though, the drill completed its circuit, forming a sort of hatch, which the private quickly broke through, and he sprinted to the end of the corridor ahead. There, he practically hurled himself inside the open pod before frantically mashing every button on the control panel until at last it launched. The hatch dropped just before a monstrous reptilian beast leapt for him. 2 seconds later, the pod was ejected from port, destined to roam the stars until it either ran out of power or was picked up by another cruiser. After taking a brief moment to allow his adrenaline subside, Edmund relaxed in his seat. It was over, he thought. He'd made it. Whatever came next, it would at least be peaceful. At least it would be quiet. The drone above the pines. When I moved to Chester County, 45 miles west of Philadelphia, I thought I'd found the perfect place to live. The town was small enough to be quiet, but big enough to avoid the feeling of being in the middle of nowhere. There were rolling hills, friendly neighbors, and rows of pine trees bordering my backyard that offered just the right amount of privacy. I was happy here, at least I thought I was, until 2 weeks ago when something happened that I still can't explain. Let me back up a bit. It started with rumors. Over the last month, I heard chatter online about strange lights in the sky along the East Coast. Most of the reports seemed to come from New Jersey, just across the river from me. People called them drones, big, silent things that hovered too long in one spot or moved in ways no commercial drone could. A few videos made the rounds, but they were grainy, low-resolution clips that could have been anything. I didn't think much of it. That night, though, the night of the party, everything changed. It was a Saturday, and I'd invited a few friends over for drinks and a small bonfire. It was nothing fancy, just the kind of laid-back get-together I liked hosting. The night was cool, the air smelling faintly of pine and the bonfire crackling in the backyard. Around midnight, the party started to wind down. A few of us were still chatting by the fire, but most of the guests had left. I excused myself to take out the recycling. The bin was tucked away behind the house, near the pines that formed the natural boundary of my property. As I stepped around the corner of the house, I glanced up, and there it was. At first, I thought it was just a drone. It hovered directly above the tallest pine tree, motionless, except for a faint pulsating glow rippling across its surface. The light wasn't like anything I'd seen on a drone before. It was soft, almost organic, and it shifted in strange, fluid patterns. I squinted, trying to discern its shape. It was roughly oval, but there was something almost alive about the way it shimmered in the dark. I froze. The air felt heavier, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. I told myself to move, to get my phone and take a picture, but I couldn't. My legs refused to cooperate, and my hands hung limply at my sides. Then the craft tilted slightly, and for the first time I realized it wasn't making any noise. No hum, no whir of propellers, nothing. It was completely silent, floating no more than 30 feet above the tree. As I stared, something on its surface shifted. A faint beam of light, no brighter than a flashlight, swept downward, tracing over the pines and the patch of ground where I stood. For a moment I felt weightless, as if the ground beneath me had disappeared. My vision blurred and a sharp metallic taste filled my mouth. Then just as suddenly as it had appeared, the thing shot upward into the night sky, vanishing instantly. I stood there, paralyzed for what felt like an eternity, staring at the empty space above the tree. Eventually I stumbled back toward the house, my legs shaky beneath me. When I rejoined the party, I kept what I'd seen to myself. I hadn't known some of my partygoers all that long, and first impressions were important to me. The last thing I wanted was for them to think I was insane. Instead, I poured myself another drink and tried to focus on the conversation, but I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. The way it moved, the silence, the beam of light. By the time everyone left, I still hadn't decided if I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I'd had one too many drinks, but deep down I suspected that whatever I'd seen above the pines that night wasn't a normal drone, and it wasn't something I was going to forget. The following week passed in a strange haze. Every time I stepped outside, my eyes would drift toward the pine tree where I'd first seen the object. It became a habit, checking the sky, scanning for any sign of the faint glow or the strange patterns that had shimmered across its surface. I didn't see anything, but the feeling lingered, that nagging sense that it had been real. I started searching online, trying to find someone else who might have seen what I'd seen. The sightings weren't hard to find. Forums were filled with posts about strange lights and drones behaving oddly, though most of the reports came from neighboring states. Whatever was happening, it was obvious it wasn't confined to Pennsylvania. It wasn't just the forums either. There were scattered videos on social media, blurry, shaky clips of glowing objects darting through the sky. Some were obvious fakes, but others reminded me too much of what I'd seen. The silence, the movement, the glow. By Friday, I was obsessed. I spent hours scrolling through countless posts and videos, ignoring texts and calls from friends. The weekend was approaching, and I had decided to spend every night in my backyard watching the sky. That Friday night, armed with a blanket, a thermos of coffee, and my phone, I set up a makeshift observation spot in my yard. The air was cool and crisp, the stars glittering in a clear sky. The pine trees loomed dark and still against the horizon, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. I stayed outside until nearly 2 in the morning, but nothing happened. Saturday night was the same, just me, the stars, and an unsettling quiet. By Sunday, I'd begun to feel ridiculous. Maybe it was just a drone after all, and I'd let my imagination run wild. I considered the possibility that I'd made a big deal out of nothing. But then came the second sighting. It happened just as the sun dipped below the horizon. I was walking my dog, Buddy, along the trail behind my house. The path wound through a patch of woods before opening up into a field that bordered a neighbor's property. I'd taken this route hundreds of times without a second thought, but tonight, something felt off. Buddy tugged on his leash, his nose to the ground, unusually subdued. I looked up, and there it was. This time, the object hovered just above the neighbor's yard, maybe 50 feet in the air. It was the same as before, silent and glowing faintly with those strange patterns rippling across its surface. But it was lower now, much closer to the ground. "Jesus," I whispered, my grip tightening on Buddy's leash. He noticed it too. His ears flattened against his head, and he let out a low, menacing growl, a sound I'd never heard him make, before, not even at other dogs. The object pulsed once, its glow intensifying. Buddy started barking frantically, loudly and sharply enough to echo through the trees. Then, without warning, Buddy stopped. His barking cut off mid-yap, and he dropped to the ground, whining softly. I crouched down, running my hands over him. He wasn't hurt, but he was trembling. His body pressed flat against the dirt as if he were trying to disappear into it. "Buddy," I whispered. "What's wrong?" The answer was hovering above us. The object pulsed again, brighter this time, and I felt the now familiar tingling sensation on my skin. It was faint, but it spread quickly, like static electricity crawling over me. I reached for my phone, fumbling to unlock the screen. I pointed it toward the object, my thumb hovering over the record button, but the screen froze. No matter what I did, the phone refused to respond. The object pulsed again, and I swear it, tilted slightly as if scrutinizing me. I realized then it wasn't just a drone. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. My chest tightened, and the tingling on my skin gave way to a cold, creeping dread. The object drifted closer, its glow bright enough now to illuminate the tops of the pine trees. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I grabbed Buddy, scooping his trembling body into my arms, and bolted back toward the house. My feet pounded against the trail, the cold air stinging my lungs, but I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. When I reached the house, I slammed the door behind me and locked it. Buddy squirmed out of my arms and took cover under the kitchen table, his tail tucked between his legs. I collapsed onto a chair, and for a long time, I just sat there, staring at the window. The yard was dark and still, as if nothing at all had happened, but I knew better. Whatever it wasn't gone. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the object, its pulsing light, the way it hovered so impossibly still, the hypnotic shifting patterns on its surface. And I shivered. Buddy stayed under the kitchen table until the next morning, refusing to come out no matter how much I coaxed him. I tried to convince myself that everything would feel normal in the daylight, but the house felt different somehow. Less secure, violated. When the sun rose, I threw myself into distractions. I cleaned the house, scrolled aimlessly through social media, and caught up on work emails. But every so often, I'd glance out the window toward the pine trees, half expecting to see the object hovering there again. By the afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know if anyone else had seen anything like it. I returned to the forums where I'd first read about the drones. Most of the posts were the same. Blurry photos, vague descriptions, and lots of speculation. But then I found something that sent a chill through me. One user, calling themselves eerie44, had posted a detailed account of an encounter just 2 days ago. They described seeing a glowing object hovering near their house in rural New Jersey. It was eerily similar to what I'd seen. The silence, the strange pulsing light, the way it reacted to being observed. The object scanned me with a beam of light, eerie44 wrote. It wasn't bright, more like a faint spotlight, but it made my skin tingle. Since then, I've heard strange noises at night. Clicking sounds outside my window, almost mechanical. My dog barks at nothing, and my electronics keep glitching. The Umai post ended there, but the comments were filled with people sharing similar stories. A few even mentioned strange dreams following their encounters. My stomach tightened as I read. It was all too familiar. That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee with Buddy curled up at my feet. Every light in the house was on, and I kept my phone and a flashlight within arm's reach. At some point past midnight, Buddy's ears perked up. He let out the same guttural warning he'd given on the trail previously. I froze, listening. The sound came from outside, faint but unmistakable. A clicking noise, rhythmic and mechanical. It wasn't like the creak of branches in the wind or the scuttle of some small animal. This was deliberate, precise. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the back entrance. Buddy stayed close to my heels, his growl low and constant. My hand trembled as I unlocked the door and stepped out onto the porch. The yard was empty, the pine trees swaying gently in the breeze. The clicking noise had stopped. For a moment, I wondered if it was all in my head. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a faint glow through the trees. It was back. The object hovered just beyond the tree line, its light pulsing faintly. My breath caught as it began to drift closer, its glow illuminating the needles on the tallest pines. I raised the flashlight, pointing the beam toward it, but the light didn't seem to faze it. This time, I didn't try to run. I don't know if it was out of curiosity or sheer determination, but I stood my ground, gripping the flashlight tightly. The object tilted slightly, its surface once again shimmering with those strange, shifting patterns. A faint beam of light swept downward, tracing over the porch where I stood. The tingling sensation returned, stronger this time, spreading over my skin like static electricity. My phone, sitting on the table inside, began to buzz and glitch, the screen flashing erratically. The object pulsed brighter, and for a moment, I thought it might do something more, get closer, emit another beam, or even make a sound. But then it zipped upward, disappearing into the night sky as quickly as it had come. For a long time I stood there, staring at the empty space it had left behind. When I eventually turned in for the night, utterly exhausted, I had more questions than ever and no answers. The next morning I felt like I was losing my grip. My thoughts spun in endless circles trying to make sense of what was happening. Twice now I'd seen it, whatever it was, and it had seen me. At this point, its visitations seemed intentional. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop. The forums had become my lifeline, a place where I could compare notes with others who had experienced similar things. I typed out my encounter in detail, hesitating only before I hit post. What if no one believed me? What if they thought I was crazy? But the thought of keeping this to myself felt worse. Almost immediately, responses started pouring in. Some people dismissed it outright. "You just saw a fancy drone, bro," one comment read. But others shared stories that mirrored mine. Clicking noises outside their homes, glitches in electronics, vivid, unsettling dreams. It wasn't until I found an older thread by Edelaney44 that I started to feel truly afraid. Edelaney44 had been posting on the forum for months, documenting sightings of glowing objects in rural areas. His descriptions matched mine. The silence, the pulsing light, the tingling sensation. But his later posts took a darker turn. "Ever since the second sighting, I feel like I'm being watched," he wrote in one post. "Not just when I'm outside, inside too. I'll catch movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turn, there's nothing there. My electronics glitch constantly and my dog refuses to go near the windows anymore." Another post was even more chilling. "I've started having dreams, if they are dreams. I'm lying on a cold metal surface, unable to move. There's a bright light above me and I can hear clicking noises, like something's walking around me. I wake up drenched in sweat every time, but the feeling doesn't go away. It's like they're in my head now." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about those posts. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, but I couldn't ignore the growing paranoia. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every flicker of light from my phone made my stomach clench. When I finally drifted off to sleep, I dreamed. In the dream, I was standing in my backyard. The pine trees loomed tall and dark against the night sky, their branches eerily still. I looked up and the object was there, larger than before, its light so bright it cast shadows across the yard. The patterns on its surface shifted hypnotically, drawing my gaze. I couldn't look away. My body felt heavy, pinned in place, as if the air itself had solidified around me. The light grew brighter, filling my vision until there was nothing else. Then came the clicking. It was rhythmic and mechanical, growing louder and closer with each passing second. I couldn't see where it was coming from, but I could feel it, moving, around me, examining me. Suddenly, I was no longer in my yard. I was lying on something cold and metallic, my arms and legs stretched out as if held in place by invisible restraints. The light above me was blinding, but I could just make out shapes moving on the edges of my vision. Tall, angular figures that moved with jerky, insect-like precision. One of them leaned closer, its silhouette blocking the light. I couldn't see its face, if it had one, but I could feel its attention. The patterns on its surface were similar to those on the object, shifting and glowing in a way that made my head ache. When I woke up, my heart was racing, and my sheets were soaked with sweat. I could still hear the faint clicking noise echoing in my ears. It was just a dream. It had to be. But as I sat up trying to catch my breath, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the window above my bed, faint but unmistakable, was a pattern of glowing lines. They shifted and pulsed, just like the ones on the object. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the corner of my living room, every light in the house turned on, clutching Buddy like a lifeline. He seemed calmer than before, but every so often his ears would twitch, his nose lifting toward the air, as if he smelled something I couldn't. The patterns on my window had disappeared by morning, fading with the first rays of sunlight. I tried to convince myself that they had been nothing more than a lingering dream, but the memory of their glow was burned into my mind. That day passed in a fog. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't eat, couldn't bring myself to do anything, but sit by the window and stare out at the pines. I wanted to believe that it was over, that the object wouldn't come back, but deep down I knew better. By sunset, my paranoia had reached a breaking point. I decided to confront whatever this thing was. If it came back, I wouldn't hide. I wouldn't run. I would stand my ground and get answers, or at least try to. As night fell, I grabbed my flashlight and phone and stepped out onto the back porch. Buddy whimpered, refusing to follow me outside. I glanced back at him, huddled under the kitchen table, before turning toward the pines. The yard was quiet except for the faint rustling of branches in the wind. I stood there for what felt like hours, my breath fogging in the cool night air. My flashlight swept over the trees, their trunks casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. Then I saw it. The glow appeared just beyond the tree line, faint at first but growing steadily brighter. The object hovered into view, its light pulsing, in a slow, deliberate rhythm. It was closer than ever, no more than 20 feet above the ground, its patterns shifting and shimmering like liquid metal. I raised my phone, my hands trembling, and hit record. The screen glitched immediately, freezing on a distorted image of the glowing object. I cursed under my breath and pocketed the phone. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice breaking. "What do you want from me?" The object tilted slightly, its surface rippling in response. A beam of light swept downward, brighter and more focused than before, tracing over me with a cold, tingling sensation. I stumbled backward as the light enveloped me, the world around me dissolving into a blur. My skin prickled with static, and for a moment I felt weightless again. Then everything went still. When my vision cleared, the object had moved closer. It was so low now that I could see the details on its surface. Intricate, fractal-like patterns that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. The beam of light dimmed, and the object split open. I can't fully describe what I saw. The inside of the object wasn't mechanical. It was organic, alive. Pulsing veins of light crisscrossed its interior, and at its center was a mass of glowing orbs, each one shifting and swirling like liquid mercury. They moved in unison as though observing me, and then I felt it. Not a voice exactly, but a presence, something pressing into my thoughts. It wasn't speaking to me in words. It was more like an overwhelming flood of images and sensations. I saw distant stars, alien landscapes bathed in strange, unearthly light, and creatures that defied comprehension. I don't know how long it lasted. Seconds? Minutes? All I know is that when it was over, I was on my knees, gasping for breath. The object was gone, but I wasn't alone. The clicking noise started again, louder and more insistent. It was coming from all around me, echoing through the pines. Shadows darted between the trees, tall, angular shapes with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. They were closing in. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't stop until I was inside. The house, the door locked, and every light turned back on. Buddy was barking furiously now, his eyes wide with fear as he cowered beneath the table. For hours I sat there, clutching a kitchen knife and staring at the back door. The clicking noises faded just before dawn, but I didn't move until the first light of morning spilled through the windows. By the time the sun came up, I had barely slept, my nerves too raw from the encounter. I kept replaying the moment. The object split open, the strange orbs that seemed to be alive, and the images that flooded my mind. It didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a test. I spent the morning scouring the backyard, searching for any sign that it had been there. The grass beneath the pines was singed in patches, as if it had been exposed to extreme heat. In one spot, half hidden beneath the needles, I found something else, a fragment of metal. It was small, no bigger than a coin, and cool to the touch. The surface was etched with intricate lines like the patterns I'd seen on the object. They seemed to shimmer faintly even in the daylight. I took it inside and placed it on the kitchen counter, staring at it as if it might start moving. Buddy sniffed at it once, then bolted out of the room, his tail tucked between his legs. The fragment felt important, like a clue to whatever had happened. But the more I stared at it, the more uneasy I became. I didn't know what to do. Should I report it to who? The police, the military? No one would believe me. And even if they did, I wasn't sure I wanted them to take it. That night, the clicking started again. It was faint at first, just outside the house. I turned off all the lights and crept to the window, peering into the darkness. The pine trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches whispering against each other. Then I saw it. Movement between the trees. The shapes were back, tall and angular, their limbs bending unnaturally. There were more of them this time, at least 5, maybe 6, their movements jerky and deliberate. They circled the house, their glowing outlines barely visible in the darkness. I backed away from the window. The fragment on the counter seemed to glow brighter, as if responding to their presence. For hours, I sat in the corner of the living room, clutching a flashlight and the kitchen knife. Buddy whimpered beside me, too scared to bark. The clicking continued, growing louder, echoing through the house, and then it stopped. The silence was worse. It was as if the air itself had been sucked out of the room. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the fragment was gone. I tore the house apart searching for it, but it was nowhere to be found. Instead, I found something else. A symbol, burned into the wood of the kitchen table. It was faint but unmistakable, the same shifting pattern I'd seen on the object. That's when I realized this wasn't over. It wouldn't be over. Not ever. In the days that followed, the glitches started. My phone refused to hold a charge, the screen flickering constantly. The television turned on by itself in the middle of the night, static hissing from the speakers. Even the lights seemed to dim at random, as if the house itself was losing power. The dreams came back too. I'd wake up hyperventilating, the clicking echoing in my ears. Each time I felt the presence of the object or something connected to it watching me, waiting. I tried to leave. I packed a bag and loaded Buddy into the car, but the engine wouldn't start. The dashboard lights blinked erratically, the radio blaring static. I abandoned the car and tried calling for help, but my phone glitched every time I dialed. It was as if the world outside my house no longer existed. The last time I stepped outside, I saw them again. The shapes were standing at the edge of the pines, their glowing outlines faint in the morning light. They didn't move, didn't come closer. They just stood there watching. I don't know what they want. I don't even know if they're real. But every night I hear the clicking. I think it's only a matter of time before they come back for me. Jake Harris gripped the steering wheel as he stared out into the encroaching darkness, his headlights reflected in the endless swirl of snow. The forecast had warned him that November storms could be merciless this year, but he still thought he could beat the weather and make it home in time for Joshua's birthday. Yet here he was, battling wind gusts so strong they rocked his truck side to side, the frozen highway stretching out ahead like a treacherous obstacle course. He glanced down at the dashboard clock, 6:47 p.m. The party was supposed to start at 7. He had promised he would be there no matter what. Joshua was turning 8 this year, old enough to understand what it meant for a father to break his word. The guilt weighed on Jake. He'd already missed too many milestones, too many celebrations. This was supposed to be different. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, leaning closer to the windshield. Snowflakes pelted the glass with a machine gun rattle so thick that his vision blurred. The heater blasted hot air, but his fingertips still felt cold through his gloves. Every now and again, the wind howled across the open fields, pushing the truck so forcefully that he had to correct the steering just to keep from skidding into a ditch. He turned on the radio, hoping to catch a local weather advisory. Static. He flicked through a few stations, but there was nothing, just faint crackles and garbled bursts that disappeared beneath the shrieking wind. Cell reception hadn't been much better for the past 40 miles, and he could only imagine Mia at home, phone in hand, wondering why he wasn't picking up. 50 miles from home, the roads narrowed, and the nearest interstate exit was still a good half hour away in good weather. Tonight he was traveling at barely 40 miles an hour. His eyes twitched with tension as a snowdrift appeared in the middle of the lane, and he eased the truck to the left, feeling the tires slip on hidden ice. He managed to keep control, but not without his heart pounding in sudden fear. He exhaled, tapping the brakes lightly. "Jake, you idiot," he muttered, flicking the wipers to their highest setting. "You should have turned back." But the thought of Joshua's disappointed face spurred him on. Turning around meant guaranteeing he wouldn't make it. Continuing onward meant there was still a chance, small, but enough to keep him going. The lights on his dashboard flickered for a second, then steadied. Nervous, he checked the engine temperature gauge, but it read normal. At least that was something. Outside, the snow was a relentless blur, transforming the world into a swirling chaos of white. Each flake glimmered, reflecting in his headlights, like countless tiny mirrors. He rolled his shoulders to release the tension coiled in them. His phone rested on the passenger seat, its screen dark, having lost signal an hour earlier. He'd already tried to text Mia, tried to apologize, tried to say he'd do everything in his power to make it. With each attempt, the message hovered, briefly before failing to send. Then the engine made a sputtering sound. A brief cough, nothing dramatic, but enough to set Jake on high alert. "Not now," he breathed. He eased off the gas, waiting to see if the noise would worsen, but the engine calmed. Just the whir of wheels on the slick road and the howling wind. After a few minutes, the tension in his shoulders returned with a vengeance. Every nerve in his body braced for something. He didn't know what, but he sensed trouble in the heavy air. The storm thickened. It was difficult to gauge where the road ended and the roadside began. The swirling drifts towered in places, shaped by gusts into bizarre, almost sculpted forms. As he scanned the darkness for any road signs, his eyes landed on the strangest patch of snow he'd seen all night. It wasn't the shape of it that disturbed him, but the way it moved. Flakes seemed to rise up, not swirl sideways or fall downward. They rose, lifting as though carried by a breeze that came from the ground. He blinked, certain it was just a trick of the headlights. When he looked again, it seemed normal. Still, an uneasy feeling lodged itself in the back of his mind. Time crawled. 10 miles, 20 miles. It felt like a lifetime. His watch read 7:26 p.m. Joshua's birthday party would have started by now. The knowledge tightened his throat. He pictured Joshua blowing out candles with an empty seat at the table, where Dad should be. Then came the sputter again, louder this time. The truck jerked. A warning light flared on the dash. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he eased the truck onto the shoulder, if it could even be called a shoulder in this storm. He put it in park and let the engine idle for a moment, hoping the problem would resolve itself. The blizzard raged around him, hammering the cab with blasts of wind so strong the truck shook. "Let's see what we got," he sighed, killing the engine and grabbing a flashlight from the glove compartment. The moment he opened the door, the wind tore it from his grasp, flinging a swirl of powdery snow into the cab. He fought his way out, boots sinking into the drift that nearly reached his ankles, and fumbled to close the door behind him. The cold was like a slap in the face. The wind snatched his breath away. He tugged his hood tight around his neck and bent forward, flashlight beam bobbing over the truck's front grille. Snow piled up in every seam, every hollow. He half-crawled to the hood and popped it open, letting the beam illuminate the engine. "It's probably just the weather," he mumbled, looking for anything obviously out of place. But the engine wasn't giving him much to work with. No leaking fluid, no snapped belts that he could see. The hoses looked intact. Then again, he wasn't a mechanic. He could only hope the sputtering was something minor. It was then he noticed the snow. Not just the flakes swirling in the air, but a strange, powdery substance landing gently on his sleeves. The flakes sparkled oddly in the flashlight, like tiny fragments of glass. He tried to brush them off, but they clung to the fabric, almost magnetically. As he looked closer, he realized they weren't all blowing away. Some of them seemed to melt into the material, vanishing without leaving any moisture behind. An icy chill, not from the temperature but from a sense of wrongness, crept along Jake's spine. He let the hood drop shut and turned the flashlight. On his arms, more flakes. Tens, maybe hundreds of them. They weren't normal snowflakes, the kind that melt naturally. They burrowed into the fibers of his coat. He felt a faint tug, a pull he couldn't quite describe, as if something was drawing warmth or more than warmth out of him. He shuddered, then patted frantically at his arms, but the flakes refused to dislodge. It was like trying to brush off confetti glued to his skin, each piece determined to stay. Frustrated and alarmed, he stumbled back to the driver's side door, yanked it open, and collapsed onto the seat. The howling wind followed him in until he could slam the door shut. "God, what is this?" he whispered, shining the flashlight on his hands. He pulled off his gloves, revealing a few flakes clinging to his skin. To his horror, they seemed to melt in the beams of light, sinking directly into his flesh. A wave of nausea rolled through him. It felt like someone sucking at his veins, pulling energy in something deeper, his thoughts maybe right out of him. Then, it passed. The flakes were gone. He was left gasping, cold sweat beading on his forehead. Dazed, he glanced at the clock, on the dash, which read 8:03 p.m. That couldn't be right. He could have sworn he'd been outside for only a couple of minutes. Checking his wristwatch, he saw 7:39 p.m. One read 7:39. One read 8:03. His mind spun in confusion. Which one was correct? Maybe neither. He tried to turn the key in the ignition, but the engine only coughed. A few attempts later, the lights on. The dash flickered, then died. The truck fell silent except for the raging wind outside. Jake's phone was his next hope. He picked it up from the passenger seat, fumbling to turn it on. It lit up for a moment, 7:54 p.m., and then the signal. Bars vanished. He tried the weather app, the text app, anything that would give him a clue, but each time, the phone hung on a spinning wheel before giving him an error message. "Damn it," he hissed, dropping the phone onto his lap. His breath fogged the windshield. On the other side of the glass, the headlight still illuminated a flurry of snow, but now he could almost see swirling shapes, patterns in the drifting white. Were they illusions caused by the wind or something else? The memory of the flakes creeping into his skin struck him again. He couldn't recall the exact moment it happened, only the bizarre sensation of his body being drained. And for a split second, he'd felt empty. Part of him wanted to dismiss it as the product of exhaustion and panic, yet he couldn't deny the intense realism of that tugging, pulling feeling. He was stuck, alone, in a storm growing by the minute. He reached into the back seat for a spare blanket, carefully wrapping it around himself. If the engine wouldn't run, he'd need to preserve as much warmth as possible. The wind howled louder, rattling the truck. Another wave of nauseating dread washed over him as he found more of those curious flakes on the floor mat. They glistened, under the dim overhead light, almost pulsing with a faint glow, as if they had a life of their own. He pressed the switch to kill the overhead light, wanting to hide from the sight of them. Darkness swallowed him. He could see only the whiteness outside, the swirl that never ceased, the unstoppable flow of snow that threatened to bury everything in its path. Joshua's face drifted into his mind. 8 years old. So close to being home, and yet he might as well be 1,000 miles away in this chaos. He sat there listening to the storm when the pulling sensation returned. It was gentler this time, but more insidious, like invisible hands sliding across his arms and chest. He tried to flick the overhead light on again, only to find it no longer responded. The battery must be nearly drained. Jake stifled a cry. He had to keep his wits, had to find a way out of this. Maybe if he could flag down another vehicle, or walk to the next mile marker. But that prospect, in the heart of the storm, was terrifying. He fiddled with the key again, a spark of hope igniting when the engine gave a feeble rumble. Then it died with a disheartening click. A short burst of static erupted from the radio, causing Jake to jump. "Hey, hello?" he said, reaching for the dial. The static fluctuated, an unsteady hiss that rose and fell. For a moment he thought he heard a voice in it, barely a whisper. He leaned closer, turning the volume up. The voice, if it even was a voice, was lost beneath the swirling chaos of static. Another wave of dizziness made him slump back. Time was slipping away in more ways than one. The clock on his wrist read 7:42 now. Hadn't it read that before? He shut his eyes, fighting back a sense of panic. He realized his thoughts were drifting, scattering. Moments earlier, he knew exactly what he needed to do. Try the engine, check the phone, conserve heat. Now, he struggled to remember that order of events. It was as though something was peeling away his logic piece by piece. "Focus, Jake," he scolded himself. "Stay awake. Stay in control." Outside, the storm raged louder, but inside the truck, a vacuum-like silence filled the cab, broken only by Jake's ragged breathing. He rubbed his arms, half expecting to feel more flakes, burrowing into his skin. Maybe they were already inside him, draining him from the inside out. The wind slammed the truck so violently that it rocked on its suspension. He cursed. If any other drivers came this way, they'd be mad to keep going. But maybe, just maybe, someone would notice his hazard lights or the glare of his headlights. If the battery wasn't completely dead, perhaps the light still worked enough to signal that he was there. He turned the key slightly, just enough to switch on the electronics. The headlights flickered to life, casting feeble beams into the white haze. "Come on," he whispered, as if summoning help by sheer force of will. No headlights appeared in the distance, no glow on the horizon, just endless, devouring darkness, punctuated by swirling snow. Another glance at his phone. Dead. The battery icon showed a question mark. He tried to recall the last time he'd charged it, but the memory slipped away. The storm hammered onward, the hours slipping in and out of his grasp. 7:46, 8:10, 8 Sao. None of it made sense. He forced himself to think of Joshua again. That sweet smile, the gap in his front teeth. It centered him for a fleeting moment. "I'll get home," he vowed quietly. "I'll be there for him, no matter what it takes." The vow kindled a tiny spark of energy deep within, enough to dull the creeping dread. Still, the memory of those flakes haunted him. He could almost feel them swirling inside his veins, scraping at his consciousness like 1,000 tiny needles. The thought of them feeding on him, or whatever they were doing, made his stomach churn. The emptiness in his chest was expanding, a hollow ache that threatened to unravel him if he dwelled on it too long. He breathed in and out, shaking off another dizzy spell. The overhead light remained off, the radio silent. There was only the storm and that maddening hush inside the truck. Outside, snow had piled up to the doorframe, burying the lower half of his tires. If help didn't come soon, he would be completely stuck. Jake slumped in the driver's seat and closed his eyes. His mind felt so heavy, so tired. The wind battered, the windows, the cold inching its way in. All he could do was cling to the promise he had made, to get home, to be there for his son. He wasn't sure how much time passed, whether he nodded off or simply drifted, but when he finally opened his eyes, his wristwatch read 8:21. A surge of confusion shot through him. It had to be later than that, or earlier. He couldn't be sure. The quiet in the truck enveloped him like a cocoon, and the storm outside droned on like an endless scream. Gripping the steering wheel, Jake mustered the last scrap of determination he had. He would try again. Maybe the engine would turn over once more. Maybe he could roll a mile or two and find a gas station or a phone booth. Anything. He turned the key. Silence. Then a faint click. And with that, any glimmer of hope that he could drive out of here extinguished. He closed his eyes, fists clenched against the trembling in his body. He had to come up with a new plan. He had to find another way. Someone else, some other place. Because if he stayed here too long, he knew that unearthly snow would come for him again. And the next time he feared it might strip away every last trace of who he was. Jake sat slumped in the driver's seat, every muscle in his body quivering from cold and lingering fear. He felt as though he'd sunk into the truck's worn cushions and couldn't lift himself out. Outside, the storm still howled, the wind threatening to tear the world apart flake by flake. Inside, all was silent save for Jake's ragged breathing. The truck's engine was dead, the battery too weak to power the heat or the light. The only illumination came from the headlights, which still glowed faintly into the swirling snow ahead, though he had no idea how much longer they'd last. He rubbed his arms to keep warm, half expecting to feel those strange clinging flakes again. Instead, his hands found patches of damp cloth where snow had melted. The memory of how the flakes had burrowed into his coat and skin was impossible to shake. He wasn't sure what was worse, the biting cold or the haunting emptiness that had remained after they seeped away. Tremors rattled his legs and he pressed them together, trying to steady himself. The night felt interminable, time slipping through his fingers. Between the blinking clock on the dash and the contradictory numbers on his watch, he had no idea what hour it might be. His phone, similarly unhelpful, showed a black screen whenever. He tapped it. "Joshua," he murmured, letting his head drop against the seat. He tried picturing his son's face as it might look tonight, blowing out 8 bright candles. The image flickered in his mind. Was that a memory? Or just an aspiration? He couldn't tell anymore. Each time he tried to focus, his thoughts scattered, like the snow outside. He turned his eyes to the window. The darkness beyond it teemed with white shapes, but occasionally he sensed movement that had nothing to do with wind. A faint blur darting among the drifts or a swirl of flakes coalescing in a vertical slant that reminded him of a figure. Jake blinked hard, unsure whether the storm was playing tricks on him or if something really lurked just beyond the glass. He could no longer sit idle. The cold would kill him if he stayed much longer, and whatever was out there, those alien flakes or something worse, seemed poised to come for him again. He had to get out. He had to find help. "Okay," he whispered, voice trembling. "Okay, I'm not dying in here." Slowly, he reached over and unlatched the glove compartment. He pulled out a small flashlight with fading batteries. He also spotted a half-eaten protein bar, which he tucked into his coat pocket. It was better than nothing. Before he opened the door, he hesitated. The wind had been brutal last time, nearly, tearing the handle from his grip. Now it howled even harder, but every second spent waiting felt worse, a creeping dread of something unseen drawing closer. With a bracing breath, he tugged the door latch. A blast of icy air sliced across his face, immediately numbing his cheeks. Snow swirled into the cab. He forced the door open against the wind and stumbled out into the storm. His boots sank into the drift, the snow almost to his knees. Leaning against the side of the truck for support, he kicked the door shut behind him reducing the glow from the headlights to little more than a muted gleam. Jake tried to breathe steadily, but each gust seemed to wrench the air from his lungs. The flashlight's beam barely penetrated the white swirl. He pointed it forward and took one step, then another. His body hunched to remain upright in the gale. Ice crystals scraped his exposed skin like shards of glass. The highway was invisible, beneath a thick layer of snow. It felt like he was wading through a frozen ocean. 2 minutes in and his thighs already burned. His body hadn't recovered from the first round with those uncanny flakes. Even the simple act of walking felt monumental. Still, he pressed on, scanning for any sign, maybe a road sign or an exit ramp, a guardrail, or the headlights of a passing car. But nothing emerged from the blizzard's choking grip. He paused to rest, panting, and that was when he caught sight of a faint, wavering figure in his peripheral vision. It looked like a person standing in the swirling white only a few yards away. A survivor? Another traveler? "Hey!" Jake shouted, though the wind tore the word from his lips. He waved his flashlight, shining it toward the spot. The beam revealed a wall of white, no trace of anyone there. He swallowed a rising panic. "You're seeing things," he told himself, turning his gaze forward again. But not 10 steps later, the figure returned, this time on his other side, no more than a silhouette, in the swirling gusts. He whipped around to face it, but again it vanished. The emptiness left behind felt heavier than the storm itself. Just as he was about to force himself onward, the flakes came again. They fell in a concentrated flurry around him, distinct from the rest of the snow. Each was iridescent, glimmering under the flashlight's dim light. He raised his free hand in an attempt to shield himself. Then they struck. Not with physical force, but with the same draining pull he'd felt before, only stronger. He gasped, dropping to his knees as a wave of dizziness overcame him. The flakes latched onto his arms, his shoulders, his face. He watched in horror as they nestled against his skin, seemingly dissolving into it. In an instant, a cold, sucking sensation gripped him from within, as though invisible siphons were draining every vital essence he possessed. "No. Stop," he coughed. The words sounded pitiful, lost in the wind. He had no strength to tear them off. His arms felt paralyzed. As the flakes dug deeper, images from his own life began to flicker through his mind like a broken reel of film. Joshua as a toddler, learning to walk. Holly's first Christmas, the day he and Mia bought the house. His memories were playing on fast forward, and with each flitter of recollection, he felt part of it slip away. He clenched his jaw, desperately trying to hold on to them, but the harder he fought, the more they seemed to evaporate. Then, just as before, the flakes re-emerged. One by one, they left his body, fluttering into the night. He collapsed, breathing in ragged gulps of frozen air. A hollow ache expanded in his chest, accompanied by a dreadful certainty that something in him was now smaller, emptier. He pressed his gloved hand against his sternum, half expecting to find a physical hole there. The flakes, with the pieces of him they had stolen, whirled away into the storm. Perhaps they were heading back to something larger, something that used them like a fisherman's net to trawl for souls. Jake tried to move, but everything felt distant, as though he was watching himself from outside his body. The cold pressed in, and for a terrifying moment he wondered if he'd sink into the snow and never get up. No, he had to fight. He had to keep going. Thoughts of Joshua's birthday flitted through his mind again, but now he couldn't remember the exact date. It had been November. What? The 18th? The 19th? That detail, once so crucial, now dangled just out of reach. With a desperate groan, he forced himself to stand. His legs wobbled, but he managed to remain upright. "Move," he told himself. "Move or die." And so he took another step, then another. A minute passed, or maybe an hour. Time felt elastic, governed by no logic he recognized. His flashlight beam threatened to fade, flickering ominously. In the half-light, Jake spotted what might have been a guardrail sticking up through the drifts. He stumbled toward it, adrenaline spurring him forward. But upon reaching it, He saw only a twisted piece of metal, possibly from a broken fence coated in sheets of ice. Beyond it, there was no sign of a main road or structures. With every second, hope eroded a little more. His breath came in frosty bursts, each exhalation a cloud that the wind devoured. The tractor-trailer he'd abandoned was nowhere in sight, swallowed by the whiteout. He considered turning back, but which way was back? The storm erased everything behind him as effectively as it hid everything ahead. He trudged forward until he nearly walked into a mound of drifted snow that stood nearly chest-high. Swallowing back despair, he skirted around it, boots sinking, sliding. His thighs screamed with fatigue. If not for the thick layers of clothing, the cold might already have ended him. A flicker of light caught his eye. He stopped in his tracks, trying to steady his breathing. There, just ahead, a dim glow. Could it be the headlights of another vehicle? Or was it his own truck, from some warped angle? He aimed the flashlight that way. Nothing but billowing snow. Yet in his peripheral vision, the glow was still there. He angled himself, taking a few steps, and realized the light was flickering. Not steady like electric beams, more like a flame. A candle? A lantern? A whisper of hope bolstered him. If it was a flame, it might mean shelter and other human presence. He advanced clumsily, each step feeling like a mile. The glow wavered in and out of sight as though the wind itself decided when to obscure and when to reveal it. Then he saw them again, shadows in the storm. Shapes, faint silhouettes that drifted in the periphery. They looked like people, at times standing upright, other times contorting in unnatural angles. Jake's grip on the flashlight tightened. He whipped it around, searching for any sign that they were real. The beam danced across swirling snow, revealing fleeting glimpses of what could have been limbs or elongated heads. But every time he focused the light, they were gone. "Leave me alone," he growled, though his voice cracked. He pressed on, the flickering glow his guiding star. He refused to entertain the possibility that it might be some trick conjured by these phantasms. He'd take the chance. Facing illusions of warmth was better than yielding to the relentless, ravenous cold. The next 20 yards were pure agony. His boots felt like cinder blocks, his lungs burned. He wobbled and nearly dropped the flashlight. At last, the light grew stronger, and he realized it was indeed a torch or lantern dangling from what looked like a short post. Beyond it, a snow-caked wooden sign stuck out of the ground. He couldn't make out the letters, if there were any. Next to the sign was a faint trail, perhaps an unpaved road or a path. Relief coursed through him, but so did trepidation. Who would have a lantern lit in this storm? Jake trudged forward, shining his flashlight across the sign. No words were visible, just layers of ice and snow. The lantern was an old-fashioned oil lamp swaying on a hook. It cast a feeble golden circle onto the snow. Grateful for even that small amount of light, he stepped into its glow. For the first time in what felt like ages, he felt a slight warmth caress his face. He paused there, panting. The rest of the world was a swirling void, but this circle of yellow felt like a sanctuary, even if it was only a few degrees warmer. He glanced around, searching for clues about who left the lamp. A set of footprints might have been visible once, but the storm had likely erased them. He tried calling out, but the wind swallowed his voice. A sudden sense of foreboding stabbed at him. He looked down at his arms and realized, to his horror, that the snow-like flakes had returned. They fluttered in the lamp's light, drifting from the air to land on his sleeves. A strangled whimper escaped him as he tried to brush them off, to no avail. Again they clung, like static or magnetized fragments. Jake felt his stomach drop. It was happening again. He turned off his flashlight to free a hand. With both hands, he smacked and patted at the flakes. "No, no, no," he snarled, as though sheer force of will could dislodge them. But they were relentless, sinking into his coat and dissolving. He sensed that vampiric pull, that draining sensation, a hollow ache that spread from his arms to his chest. Then they went deeper, into his very mind. Images flared behind his eyes. Mia's smiling face, the ring of daisies she wore in her hair the day they got married. He fought to hold on to that memory. But the flakes were there, siphoning it away, leaving behind a vague impression of happiness without context. Rage burned in Jake's gut. He would not let them take Mia from him. He yanked the lantern from the hook, plunging forward into the storm as if outrunning them might help. At first, it seemed insane he couldn't possibly run in waist-high drifts, but desperation fueled him. He stumbled, fell to one knee, staggered up again. The flakes kept coming. They were in his hair, on his gloves, even creeping along the lantern's handle. Flashes of memory, like individual pages torn from a book, flickered through his mind and vanished, leaving him gasping. Suddenly, the flakes rose from his body, shimmering like a cloud of diamond dust. Jake nearly collapsed, his knees buckling under the weight of the emptiness they left behind. He caught himself with one hand in the snow. The lantern dangled from his other hand, flame sputtering. He felt more disoriented than before, as though half of himself had been stolen. He watched the flakes swirl away. They drifted off, merging with the storm. Maybe they were returning to a larger presence, some cosmic force that hovered unseen, gorging itself on stolen human essence. The notion made him shiver more violently than the cold ever could. Even so, he clutched the lantern, forcing himself to keep going. The path, if that's what it was, had to lead somewhere. Perhaps a cabin or an abandoned shack. Anything with walls. If he found a building, he might barricade himself inside and wait out the blizzard. Even if the flakes found him again, at least he wouldn't freeze. His progress was pitifully slow. Each step felt heavier, drained of vitality. He glanced at his watch, but either it had stopped or he couldn't read it properly. The numbers swam before his eyes. He wasn't sure if hours were passing or seconds. The night pressed on in an unending pitch, the storm's wail constant. Then at last he saw a shape in the distance, something dark that stood out against the swirling white. He blinked, not trusting his eyes. Another illusion, or something real? He trudged closer, brandishing the lantern. The shape grew more distinct, a tree, bent and aged, standing beside a taller silhouette that loomed behind it. A structure? Yes. The outline of a building. Or was it a ruin? He couldn't be sure, but the thought of walls and a roof propelled him forward. He prayed it wasn't a complete collapse. He prayed it had a door he could seal against the wind. The thought of respite made him choke up with a mixture of relief and fear. He was too exhausted to consider that whatever lived there might not be friendly. The wind knocked him sideways and he tumbled face first into the snow. He lost his grip on the lantern, which landed with a hiss in a shallow drift. Jake scrambled to retrieve it, terrified the flame would extinguish. His gloved fingers found the metal handle. The flickering light persisted, though it guttered precariously. He heaved himself upright once more, stumbling ahead with the lantern's meager glow. Now close enough to see dark wooden boards, he realized it was indeed some kind of building, a cabin maybe, with a slanted roof weighed down by snow. Relief warred with apprehension. Who lived there? Could they help him? Or would they even answer the door in the midst of this nightmare? Jake forced himself to the entrance. His numb fingers fumbled for a handle, and he found a crude latch. Gave it a tentative tug. To his amazement, the door opened a crack, catching on something inside. "Hello," he croaked, hardly able to hear his own voice. Wind whipped past him, driving snow into the narrow gap. No response. His heart pounded. If it was abandoned, he might at least find shelter. He set the lantern down, took hold of the door with both hands and shoved. A wooden crate on the floor inside groaned and scraped across rough planks, clearing a path. Jake stumbled in, slamming the door shut behind him. He stood in the darkness, shivering uncontrollably. The wind outside rattled the cabin walls, but for the moment he was out of the direct blast. Snow dripped from his coat, forming puddles at his feet. He lifted the lantern again, letting its beam reveal a single-room interior. A table, 2 chairs, a clutter of boxes. Sparse, but intact. It smelled of dust, wood, and something he couldn't name. He barely had the strength to stand. He spotted what might have been a small fireplace at the far wall, though no fire burned there now. Without thinking, he dropped to his knees on the rickety floorboards, gasping for air. The emptiness in his chest throbbed, sharper than any physical wound. The flakes had taken more from him than he cared to contemplate. Names, faces, important moments, they all felt hazy, like half-remembered dreams. He knew he was Jake Harris, but the certainty of that knowledge was slipping, replaced by a dull ache. A part of him feared that if he tried to recall a conversation he'd had with Mia just a few days before, he wouldn't be able to. What else was gone? Would he even notice if they took something bigger? A sudden wave of exhaustion crashed over him, heavier than anything he'd felt before. Despite the primal alarm bells ringing in his mind, this cabin could be unsafe, something could be here. He couldn't fight off the need to rest. Just for a moment, he told himself, "I'll rest." Jake set the lantern carefully on the floor. The flame guttered but stayed lit, painting the rough walls with dancing shadows. Outside, the wind hammered, but it felt distant now, muffled by the cabin walls. He closed his eyes, chest heaving, arms limp at his sides. Perhaps he had minutes before the flakes came again, or maybe the storm had lulled them for the moment. He wasn't sure how long he knelt there in the dark. His mind drifted, half in a stupor. Eventually, a faint voice spoke in the corners of his perception. He snapped his eyes open, heart pounding. "Who's there?" he managed, though his voice was so hoarse it barely carried. Nothing answered. Had it been the wind? His imagination? He tried to stand, but only succeeded in slumping against the nearest wall. The entire cabin was dark except for the lantern's trembling glow. He squinted at the corners. Something seemed to shift just beyond the circle of light. Shapes? Or was it the flicker of the flame? A metallic taste of fear filled his mouth. He exhaled shakily. At least he was alive. For how long, he didn't know. This place, battered though it was, might be his only chance to stave off death. If morning ever came, perhaps the storm would ease, and he could find a way to radio for help, or even trek further if his body had the strength. But morning felt like a distant fantasy. Jake pressed the back of his head against the wall, swallowing past the dryness in his throat. One question pounded in his exhausted brain. How much of me have they already taken? And outside, the storm raged on, carrying who knew how many more of those malevolent flakes. They had found him twice now, and he had little doubt they could do so again. Perhaps they were drifting around the cabin, waiting for a chance to slip through the cracks in the walls. Their hunger seemed inexhaustible. Jake closed his eyes once more, clinging to a single thought. Mia. He pictured her just as she'd looked on their wedding day, in a simple white dress, hair braided with wildflowers. For a moment, he felt warmth welling in his chest, and then, with disquieting suddenness, the memory flickered. He couldn't quite recall the shape of her smile. Panicked, he fought to reclaim that detail, but it was as though the memory had already been partially erased. Tears burned in his eyes, and he couldn't tell if it was from grief or the biting cold. The flicker of the lantern merged with the roaring of the wind, and his consciousness wavered. He had to survive. He had to. The storm and the flakes and the eerie presences were not invincible, or so he told himself. If he could just endure a little longer, maybe somehow, he'd make it back to Joshua. Jake wrapped his arms around himself, praying that the physical embrace would anchor him. Outside, the wind snarled. Inside, shadows lurked. Something was out there. No, many somethings. He recalled the silhouettes in the storm. Plural, possibly an entire swarm. For now, though, he was out of their direct reach. In that tiny pocket of stillness, he tried to gather the frayed strands of his mind and hold them together until dawn, or until the next wave of flakes came for what remained of his soul. For a long dreamlike moment, Jake forgot where he was. He drifted, in the half-conscious haze of exhaustion, vaguely aware of darkness and cold. Slowly his senses returned. The whine of the wind outside, the musty smell of the cabin's interior, and the faint warmth from the lantern at his side. His face felt stiff with frozen sweat and melted snow, and his fingers were so numb they hardly responded when he willed them to move. He opened his eyes, blinking at the dim surroundings. The cabin's single room was cramped and old, with shelves sagging beneath dusty jars and tins. A rickety wooden table and two mismatched chairs sat in one corner. The fireplace looked usable but empty, save for a blackened pot perched on a small iron grate. At least the walls kept out the worst of the storm, though wind still slipped through cracks. Jake pulled himself upright, leaning against the wall for balance. His head throbbed with a dull ache, as though part of him had been squeezed out through a funnel. The memory of those invasive flakes came flooding back, making him shudder. He felt lighter, but not in a good way. More like a crucial part of his foundation had been chipped away. He rubbed his eyes only to jerk his hand away when he noticed new flakes clinging to his glove. Panic squeezed his chest until he realized these were just normal snow crystals that had drifted off his sleeve. Nothing else pressed inward on his mind. The sensation of being drained had subsided, at least for now. A sudden noise, wood creaking, startled him. He froze, straining to listen. It wasn't the wind or the familiar groan of the cabin's beams. It was a footstep. Another human being? Or something else? Jake picked up the lantern, its flame flickering in response to his movement. Slowly, he angled the light toward the far corner. At first, he saw nothing but shadows. Then the darkness shifted, revealing the hunched form of an older woman. She wore a thick coat and knitted cap, her wrinkled face illuminated by the flicker of the lamp. She'd been standing there all along, silent as the grave. Who? Jake's voice cracked. He coughed, trying again. Who are you? She stepped forward into the lantern's glow, her expression grave. Didn't mean to frighten you, she said quietly. I've been waiting to see if you were friend or foe. Seems you're just lost. Jake swallowed hard. Relief and fresh anxiety warred within him. I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was here. The storm, my truck. He gestured weakly toward the door. I needed shelter. She nodded, eyes moving over him with a keen intensity. It's all right. Storm's no place for man nor beast tonight. She paused, her weathered features softening. My name's Tess. Jake managed a faint nod. Jake Harris. He shifted uncomfortably, the ache in his muscles flaring. I didn't realize, and I thought this place might be abandoned. Tess walked over, her boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. I don't live here, not exactly. This was my daddy's trapping cabin, place to ride out the worst weather if it comes on sudden. She cast a glance at the rotting shelves and scattered tools. I keep a few supplies here for emergencies, didn't expect to find another soul. Not many come this way. Jake shivered, trying not to appear as terrified as he felt. Something's out there. Not just the storm. The woman gave a short, humorless laugh. I know. He studied her for a moment. Her face was deeply lined, her eyes reflecting something beyond mere caution, like she had seen horrors he could scarcely imagine. Her clothes were old, but well, kept layers of flannel and thick wool. A hunting knife hung in a leather sheath at her belt. You? Jake cleared his throat. You've seen the strange flakes? It felt surreal just saying it. The ones that stick to you and... She nodded. Steal what's inside. Your memories. Your warmth. Your... self. Her voice wavered slightly on that last word. You're not the first to experience it, Jake Harris. Nor the last, I fear. A swell of relief mixed with dread rose in Jake's chest. At least he wasn't going insane. Someone else had encountered these things, but that meant they were undeniably real and far from harmless. What are they? He asked hoarsely. Some kind of freak weather phenomenon? Tess walked to the fireplace, tapping the ash with the toe of her boot. No mere weather, she murmured. They come with storms, sure, but they ain't just snow. I've heard 100 theories, spirits, demons, ghosts, but I've seen enough to guess they're not of this earth. The wind slammed against the cabin as if to punctuate her words. Jake clenched his jaw. She had to be right. How else could he explain the time distortions, the living sense of hunger that accompanied each flurry? Tess turned her gaze on him, eyes narrowed. I call them the empty ones. Some say they're extraterrestrials that feed off humans like we're livestock. They're barely here physically, just enough to latch onto us through those flakes. And that's how they strip us down, piece by piece. Empty ones, Jake echoed, remembering how hollow he felt each time they'd struck. Why are they here? Why now? They've always been here, Tess replied grimly. Least that's what I figure. Some storms blow in, from nowhere, carrying more than just snow. For them, it's a chance to hunt. If you're unlucky enough to be caught in it, well, you know the rest. She paused, absently running a hand over the bricks of the fireplace. I've encountered them more times than I can count, but seldom this fierce. Must be a big group out there tonight. Jake tried to stand taller, though his knees still trembled. Is there a way to fight them? Or escape? Tess regarded him with pity. If there is, I never found it. You can try to outrun the storm, but they'll follow. Best hope is to wait it out. Keep yourself sheltered. And maybe, just maybe, you slip away with enough left of you to rebuild a life. A cold wave of despair rolled through Jake. Rebuild a life. But how do you rebuild what's stolen from your mind? He looked down at the lantern, the tiny flame dancing nervously. They took something from me. Memories of my wife, my son. I can barely hold on to them. She nodded, expression somber. That's what they do. They feed on who we are. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence pressed in, broken only by the winds howling. Jake clenched his fists, a surge of desperation boiling inside him. I have to get home, Tess. My son's birthday is, or was, today. Tomorrow. I can't even remember how long. I've been out here. He realized how pitiful he sounded. I can't just hide until the storm stops. I understand, she said quietly. You can try moving at first light. This storm might break by then. Or not. They're more active at night. But if they're determined, they won't let you go easy. There's still an awful lot of darkness out there. She lifted her chin toward the door. You have your own reasons to leave, I suppose. Just know, every moment you're out in that mess, you risk losing more of yourself. Jake's teeth clacked as he forced a bitter laugh. So, I choose between freezing to death in here or being eaten alive out there. Tess exhaled, deep lines framing her mouth. I'm sorry. Truly. But you stumbled into something bigger than either of us. My advice is to keep your mind busy. Focus on the memories that matter most. When the flakes come, they can't take what you refuse to let go. She reached into a wooden bin by the fireplace, pulling out a few logs. Carefully, she stacked them in the hearth. Let's try to get some heat going, she said, striking a match. Might help you recover some strength at least. Flames licked at the dry wood, soon crackling to life. Jake felt the warmth on his cheeks, a small but profound mercy. For a while he simply stood there, letting the heat seep into his bones. Tess rummaged through dusty boxes, producing 2 cans of soup. She opened them with a pocket knife and poured the contents into a dented metal pot, then suspended it above the fire with a makeshift hook. Thank you, Jake said, voice earnest. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until the smell of soup drifted into the air. For a moment, the warmth and the promise of food dulled the nightmare raging outside. Tess nodded. Storm might last all night. When the sun rises, if it does, maybe it'll be calm enough for you to head out. She hesitated, glancing at the boarded window. But I have a feeling this one's not going to let up so easily. Jake sank onto one of the chairs, the wood creaking beneath his weight. Can you tell me more about them? He asked. His fear urged him to understand everything. How do they... He couldn't bring himself to say feed. The word felt too vile. They're not fully here, Tess explained, kneeling by the fire. At least not in our sense. They exist somewhere else and project themselves into our world. Those snowflake forms are part of it. Maybe physical fragments of something bigger. They latch onto us, siphoning our essence back to their hive, or mothership, or dimension. I doubt we'll ever know. All I do know is each time they rejoin their source, they carry a piece of you along. She stirred the soup with a battered spoon. That's why I call them the empty ones. They leave you with holes. Jake rubbed his arms, recalling that sickening sensation of something being torn from him. Couldn't you kill them? Maybe burn them or something? She let out a slow breath. I've tried. Fire can momentarily hold them off, but it's like trying to burn water. Might scatter them for a second, but they'll just regroup. Best you can do is protect yourself. Thick clothing helps a bit, slows them down, but it won't stop them if they're determined. The soup began to bubble, and Tess carefully lifted the pot from the flame. She poured half of it into a tin mug and offered it to Jake. He took it with grateful hands, though the intense heat almost scalded his palms through his gloves. He sipped, coughed a little as the warmth flooded his mouth and throat, then tried another sip. By the time he swallowed a few mouthfuls, he felt marginally more human. Thank you, he repeated. This means more than you know. She offered a thin smile, her gaze distant. I've lost enough folks out here. Couldn't leave you to die if I had a choice. Jake noticed a flicker in her expression. Pain, regret, maybe a memory of someone she cared about who hadn't been so lucky. He wanted to ask, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he focused on the soup. It tasted like salt and vegetables, bland but life-giving. For several minutes, they shared a thoughtful silence, broken only by the wind's shriek and the pop of burning logs. Jake felt the first glimmer of safety since the storm began, though he suspected it was merely a fragile veneer. If the empty ones could sift through walls as easily as they sifted through clothing, no barricade would truly protect him. Eventually, Tess spoke again. You got a family waiting on you, you said? Jake nodded, swallowing thickly. A wife, Mia, 2 kids. Joshua, he's 8 now. The statement caught in his throat. I missed his birthday. A rush of shame and anger welled up inside him. I don't even remember what day it is. Tess rested a hand on his shoulder, surprisingly gentle. All the more reason for you to hold tight to those memories. Repeat their names, their faces. Don't let the emptiness crowd them out. He stared into the fire, determined to do exactly that. He conjured Mia's warm smile, her honey-colored hair that always fell loose from her ponytail. He pictured Joshua's bright eyes full of questions and Holly's giggle whenever he tossed her into the air. If the flakes came again, he'd fight to keep those images. He'd fight until he had nothing left. How did you learn so much about them? He asked quietly. Tess exhaled through her nose. Years ago, I lost my husband to a storm like this. He went out to fetch firewood and he never came back quite the same. That was the first time I saw the flakes. Over time, I encountered them again. I read what I could, listened to stories from old-timers. Everyone had a different name for them. Some believed they were devils. Others said they were vengeful spirits. But enough scraps of information lined up about how they drain you, how they come with bad storms. Eventually, I pieced it together. Jake closed his eyes, empathizing with the anguish beneath her words. I'm sorry, he murmured. I wish I could say all of this is impossible, but she shrugged, though her voice shook. Impossible or not, it's real. The question is, what are you going to do now? Jake swallowed. He still felt that hollow ache, but the soup and the fire had bolstered his resolve. I have to try to get home, he said quietly, the flickering firelight reflecting in his eyes. I can't leave Mia and the kids wondering if I'm alive, and I need to see if they can remind me of what was taken. Tess studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. Then that's your path. I'll do what I can to help, come morning. But if the storm doesn't let up, you'll have a devil of a time out there. The flakes will be thick as gnats on a corpse. Jake winced at the mental image. If morning comes and the storm is still raging, I'll have to chance it anyway. I can't just stay here. Tess patted his arm. I understand. We'll see how it looks at first light. With that, they lapsed into a heavy silence again. Jake stared into the flames, letting the crackle and warmth lull him. He didn't want to sleep, afraid of what might slither into his dreams. But his body craved rest, and he found himself nodding off. Tess sat across from him, quietly tending the fire as if standing guard. At some point, Jake drifted into a shallow doze. He imagined swirling shapes beyond the cabin walls, shifting shadows that blotted out entire patches of snow, faceless forms, with elongated fingers that reached for him. He heard hollow voices chanting in a language that was both alien and disturbingly human. It felt terrifying and unavoidable, like the unstoppable creep of nightfall. He jerked awake when the wind rattled the door. Tess looked over from the fire. "It's getting worse," she said, frowning. The pained resignation in her voice made Jake's skin crawl. If the storm was intensifying, that meant more flakes, more feeding. He peeled off his wet gloves and set them near the fire to dry, placing a chunk of wood into the growing embers. "Is there anything else we can do?" She was silent for a moment. "I've got a flare gun in one of the boxes. If the wind dies down a bit, maybe we can signal someone on the highway or in town. There's a mechanic, Gabe, who patrols these roads when the weather turns rough. Helps stranded travelers sometimes. He might be your best shot at a ride, if he's still out there." Hope sparked in Jake's chest. "We should try." Tess gave a slow nod. "We will. Just be prepared for disappointment if the storm swallows that flare whole." Jake exhaled, leaning back against the wall. He was so tired he could barely see straight, but the conversation steadied him. For the moment, they had a plan, however meager. "Get some rest," Tess said. "I'll keep watch for a bit. If anything changes, I'll wake you." Her tone hinted at a watchfulness that extended beyond mere storm gazing. She'd be watching for those parasitic flakes too. Jake opened his mouth to protest that he could stay awake, but a wave of dizziness changed his mind. "All right," he managed, pressing a hand to his temple. "I'll try." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal. Jake closed his eyes, exhaustion embracing him in a sudden wave. He let the warmth from the fire curl around him. As he drifted off, he repeated a silent mantra of names: Mia, Joshua, Holly, clinging to them like a life raft on a storm-lashed sea. He didn't know what dawn would bring. He only knew he had to face it, for better or worse. Jake woke to the sound of muffled weeping. For a moment, he wasn't sure if it was someone else or if he was hearing an echo of his own nightmares. The cabin was dark aside from the embers glowing in the fireplace. When he shifted on the hard wooden floor, his entire body ached. His head still felt hollowed out, like the swirling storm had carved tunnels in his mind. He blinked and made out Tess's shape by the door, huddled against it as if to block something out. A single band of grayish light seeped through the cracks around the doorframe, enough to reveal her drawn face. "Tess?" he rasped. "You all right?" She brushed a sleeve across her face and turned to him, eyes swollen with regret. "It's morning," she said softly, though her tone held no relief. "The storm's still going, but different now. I can feel them. They're everywhere." Jake struggled to his feet, grimacing at stiff muscles. He sidled up next to her and peered out through a small gap in the boards that covered the window. Outside, a pale wash of daylight filtered through churning clouds. The snow still fell, but in a slower, drifting manner. The howling wind had eased, replaced by a dull hush. At first glance, it almost looked peaceful. But as Jake's eyes adjusted, he realized the so-called flakes blanketed everything. They clung to the trees like strange frost, shimmered on drifts, and danced in the air in a ghostly ballet. A deep shiver twisted through him. It was as if the entire world was dusted with that hungry presence, no mere storm, but a thick, predatory swirl of alien life waiting to devour more. How can we get through that? His breath fogged the glass. Tess let out a trembling sigh. "We try to run. We may never make it. But I know you have to try. Maybe the daylight will keep them from overtaking us as quickly. Sometimes they're weaker when the sun's out." Jake nodded, the mention of sunlight igniting a small hope. He thought of Mia, Joshua and Holly again, repeating their names in his mind to keep them from fading. "You said you had a flare gun?" She nodded curtly and pushed off the door. She rummaged through a wooden chest in the corner, pulling out a bright red flare gun and 2 cartridges. She handed them to Jake. "I'll come with you. I know the route, and my truck's a mile or so from here, if it's still there. If we can get it started, maybe we can outrun this." He hesitated, glancing at her worn face. "You sure? This is my problem. I don't want—" She cut him off with a stern glare. "Don't be foolish. You think I can hole up in here forever? If these creatures decide to tear this place apart, they can. At least on the road there's a chance." It was enough to end the argument. Jake gathered his minimal belongings, really just his gloves, the lantern, snuffed now to save fuel, and the flare gun. Tess grabbed a small backpack checking supplies, a couple of canned goods, a lighter, her hunting knife. Outside, the hush stretched, tense as a drawn bowstring. He pushed the cabin door open slowly, half expecting the wind to lash at him. Instead, the air felt unnaturally still and the swirling flakes drifted languidly, almost beckoning. A heavy silence pressed down, broken only by the crunch of their boots in fresh snow. Jake was sure that at any moment the flakes would lunge at them again. An image of those alien specks burrowing into his skin flashed through his mind. He grit his teeth. If they came, he'd fight as long as he could. He clutched the flare gun in his right hand, though he wasn't entirely sure how it would help beyond summoning possible rescue. Tess led the way, forging a path around tall snowdrifts. The forest seemed close by, skeletal branches drooping under the weight of ice. Eerie shapes lingered at the edges of Jake's vision, dark silhouettes that vanished if he tried to focus on them. Whether they were illusions or watchers, he couldn't tell. After about 15 minutes of trudging, they crested a small rise. Tess pointed to a battered pickup truck, half buried in a dip just off the road. Relief tightened Jake's chest. If that engine turned over, they might have a shot. They slid down the embankment, breath steaming in the cold. Up close, the pickup looked rough but maybe salvageable. Tess brushed snow off the windshield and tried the driver's door. It creaked open, and she dug out the keys from the visor. "Pray it starts," she said, voice tight. She climbed in, motioning Jake to hop on the passenger side. He did, slamming the door behind him. The interior smelled of old coffee and stale cigarettes, but it was a welcome refuge from the swirling flakes. Tess jiggled the key in the ignition, turning it slowly. The engine coughed and sputtered. Jake held his breath. Then a cough again, a whir, and miraculously it roared to life, stuttering but running. A wild grin lit Tess's face. "Yes." She pumped the gas a bit, letting the engine warm. "Might just get out of here." Jake allowed himself a moment of hope. Then, a high-pitched scraping sound made him jerk his head to the side window. The flakes were moving, coalescing in a thick cluster. They slithered across the glass like insects, each flake glinting with malevolent intent. "They're trying to get in," Jake said, a tremor in his voice. "Go, Tess. Drive." She wrestled the shifter into gear, and the pickup lurched forward, through the snow. The road was barely visible, but she seemed to know where it lay beneath the drifts. Flakes battered the windshield like hail, and he could see them sliding up the glass as if searching for a way inside. Their progress was maddeningly slow, the wheels spinning at intervals. The truck fishtailed, narrowly avoiding a shallow ditch. Tess muttered curses under her breath, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Jake tightened his grip on the flare gun, unsure what good it would do but unwilling to discard it. They rumbled onto a straighter section of road, and Tess picked up speed. Jake kept watch through the windshield, noticing how the flakes parted, in odd patterns ahead of them. It looked almost as if the storm formed corridors of swirling particles guiding them, or hurting them. The sensation made his skin crawl. A faint beep from the dashboard made Tess glance down. "We're running." "On fumes," she muttered, voice grim. "I left this truck here a while back with hardly any gas." Jake fought a surge of panic. "How far to the highway?" "Maybe 5 miles. Town's another 20 beyond that." She pressed her foot harder on the accelerator, the engine whining in protest. "If we can get that far, maybe we'll find..." Help, or at least a phone signal. He felt the emptiness inside him like a fresh wound. Each mile they drove, he wondered how many more of his memories might slip away if the flakes attacked again. He tried to keep Joshua's face in his mind, that bright grin. Suddenly, Jake spotted something up ahead. A vehicle, hazard lights, blinking weakly through the snow. "Look," he said, pointing. Tess slowed the truck. As they approached, Jake realized it was a tow truck, partially blocking the road. Its driver's door stood ajar, the occupant nowhere in sight. "Gabe?" Tess whispered. She parked behind the stranded rig, leaving the engine idling. "He's a local mechanic, roams around helping people stuck in storms." Jake recalled her mentioning him. Together they hopped out, staying close in case. The flakes converged. Sure enough, the swirling mass in the air thickened around them, an oppressive presence. Jake's scalp prickled as if anticipating an attack. "Gabe!" Tess called, voice echoing in the quiet. No answer came, just the sound of scuttling flakes across metal. They circled around the front, and Jake nearly collided with a figure crouched behind the tow truck. He froze, raising the flare gun. Then he realized it was a man in a heavy coat, hunched over with his hands pressed against his ears. "Gabe?" Tess ventured. The man lifted his head. He was older, maybe late 50s, with a salt and pepper beard. His eyes were wide, wild, a glaze of terror behind them. Flurries clung to his hat and shoulders. His cheeks looked pallid, as if all color had been siphoned out. "Keep him away," he moaned, voice cracked. "They're in my head. In my—" Jake stepped forward, lowering the flare gun. "Sir, we can help." But even as he said it, dread told him there might be no helping him at this point. The man's gaze flicked between them with childlike panic, and he clawed at the air as though swatting invisible insects. "Gabe," Tess said softly, kneeling beside him. "It's me, Tess. Hang on. Let's get you into our truck." She tried to slip an arm under his, but he flinched. His response came out a choked sob. "They took... It's gone. His sentence dissolved into mumbles, tears carving a path through the frost on his face. Jake glanced around, scanning for that dreaded cluster of flakes. The storm was thick here, the drifting shapes swirling with malicious intention. He felt a creeping numbness at the edges of his thoughts, the silent threat of another feeding. They needed to move. With a grunt, Tess and Jake each grabbed one of Gabe's arms, hauling him upright. He moaned pitifully, but at least he stumbled along. With them, the wind whipped up, hurling a new barrage of flurries. Jake's chest tightened. Their slow progress back to Tess's truck felt agonizing. Then halfway there, Gabe cried out. A sudden gust slammed into them, carrying shimmering flakes that latched onto Gabe's coat, shoulders, and neck. He howled, thrashing. Jake and Tess tried to hold him, but it was like wrestling a man possessed. The flakes burrowed in, draining him. Jake could almost see Gabe collapsing inward, eyes rolling back. He twitched violently, hands clawing the air. "No!" Tess cried, voice breaking. She wouldn't let go, even as more flakes crawled across her arms. Jake felt them swirl around his face, and panic knifed through him. His emptiness spiked, a flash of personal memories drifting away. He gritted his teeth, clinging desperately to whatever remained. But Gabe was lost, his face slackening, froth gathering at the corner of his mouth. His limbs went limp, forcing Jake and Tess to catch him. The flurries reemerged, fluttering away in a taunting cloud. The damage was done. Jake looked into Gabe's eyes. They were hollow, vacant. A gibbering sound frothed from his lips, but no coherent words formed. The man's mind was gone, devoured. Tess stared in horror, tears streaming. Jake knew in that instant there was nothing more they could do. "We have to go," he rasped, voice strangled with guilt. "Or they'll take us too." Tess nodded slowly, tears shining on her cheeks. Gently she lowered Gabe to the snow, her hand trembling as she pulled away. Then she forced herself to stand, her expression hardened with anguish. Jake helped her back to the pickup, flurries clawing at their coats. The moment they slammed the door shut, Tess stomped the accelerator, the tires spinning before gripping. Jake looked back once, seeing Gabe's limp form recede in the distance, half buried in blowing snow. They surged forward, the engine whining. Jake bit down on a scream of frustration and grief. How many more times would these creatures tear someone apart? Would he be next? "We're close to the main highway," Tess said, voice thick. "Just a couple more miles." The truck rattled onto a slightly wider road, though the snow remained deep. Jake's heart pounded like a war drum. The swirling flakes hammered the windshield, scraping across the hood. He felt the intangible tug at the edges of his consciousness, but so far it hadn't turned into a full assault. He prayed the engine would hold, that the meager gas supply wouldn't fail before they cleared the storm's epicenter. The road stretched out ghostly pale. Another sign of civilization emerged, a battered green highway marker. Jake's heart soared at the sight. "We'll signal for help," Tess said. "If we can get a call out or a text." Suddenly the engine sputtered. The pickup lurched, coughed, and died. Tess cursed, pumping the pedal in a futile attempt to revive it. But the truck merely rolled to a stop. The gauge sat well below, empty. Jake slammed a hand against the dashboard. No. Flakes battered the windshield. Already he felt that dreadful hush pressing in. "Tess," she pressed her lips together, rummaging in her backpack. "We're only about 10 or 12 miles from town. If you can walk it, you might make it." She pulled out a spare set of gloves. "I'm staying with the truck." His eyes widened. "I can't leave you here." She gave him a sad smile. "If I try to make that trek, I won't last. This storm and me, we've done our dance before, and I'm half gone as it is." She opened the glove box, pulling out an emergency flare. "Take the gun. I still have one cartridge left if you need it. Maybe someone will see it if you're close enough to civilization." Jake's voice wavered. "Tess," she shook her head firmly. "Go, get back to your family. They need you." She shoved the flare into his coat pocket, then gripped his arm. "Don't let them take your memories of them. Fight with everything you have left." He swallowed hard, tears threatening. "Thank you," he whispered. "For everything." She nodded once, eyes glimmering. Then, with a trembling breath, she opened the driver's door just enough for him to slip out. The cold air rushed in, swirling with malicious flurries. Jake braced himself, stepping into the blizzard. He heard Tess slam the door behind him. The day had grown more pallid, a flat gray sky pressing down. Every breath stung his lungs. He clutched the flare gun in one gloved hand, forging ahead, mindful of every step in the drifting snow. The highway marker pointed north, 10 or 12 miles. He could do it if he stayed focused. Flakes swirled around him like living confetti, but they didn't immediately assault him. Perhaps they were regrouping after their feast on Gabe. Or perhaps they found him less appetizing now that he was so depleted. Regardless, he pressed forward, each footstep an act of will. 1 mile, 2 miles. The wind whistled in a lower pitch, almost a moan. He sensed movement at the edges of his vision, but he refused to look. He repeated Mia's face in his mind, picturing Joshua's wide grin and Holly's bright laughter. Gradually, the swirling flakes thinned. The snowfall lessened. He emerged from the densest region of the storm onto a road that, while still snowy, revealed patches of tarmac. Relief surged through him. A sign indicated a turnoff for the next town. He just needed to keep going. The aches in his limbs felt immaterial now. He was running on adrenaline, driven by the memory of a life he refused to lose. At long last, he glimpsed houses, small suburban homes along a county road. Light posts lined the street, though most were battered by wind. Relief and dread mingled as he realized he was close to home. Would Mia and the kids even recognize him? When he saw his own driveway, he nearly collapsed in a mix of tears and laughter. The yard was coated in a fresh layer of snow. He stumbled to the front door, banging on it with half-frozen hands until Mia's wide-eyed face appeared through the window. She flung it open. "Jake," she gasped, arms wrapping around him. Warmth enveloped him. Her coat, the heated air of the house, the faint scent of ginger from the kitchen. He clung to her, words failing. Holly peeked around the corner, eyes huge, and Joshua stood behind her, mouth slightly open. "You're okay," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "We've been worried sick. Where were you? Are you hurt?" Jake tried to answer, but exhaustion claimed him. His vision tunneled. He vaguely felt Mia guide him inside, the door shutting on the cold. Then darkness caught him like a wave. Jake woke in his living room sometime later, cocooned in blankets on the couch. His limbs ached fiercely, but the warmth felt like heaven. Mia hovered nearby, pressing a lukewarm cloth against his forehead, while Joshua and Holly sat on the floor with anxious faces. "You had a fever," Mia said softly. "We were about to call for an ambulance." He swallowed, trying to focus. "I'm all right," he managed, although the hollowness inside him remained. He looked around, a wave of relief washing over him at the sight of his family. I missed your birthday, Joshua." "That's okay," Joshua whispered, creeping closer. He gently touched Jake's arm. "You're here now." Jake forced a shaky smile, but deep inside, he wondered how much of himself was truly still here. The wind outside the window had calmed for a time. Now, as he glanced past the curtains, he noticed fresh gusts blowing in. He squinted. Another blizzard was forming, darker clouds rolling in fast, the snow swirling with an unnatural glimmer. A sick feeling rooted in his gut. Those weren't ordinary snowflakes. It was them. Jake heard Joshua and Holly laughing in the next room, their excitement evident. Mia's voice somewhere in the hall responding to their pleas. Jake pushed himself upright, adrenaline surging. "Mia?" he called, already dreading the answer. She popped her head in. "They want to step outside for a moment and see the flurries. The storm's picking up again, but they won't stay out long. Promise." "No." Jake struggled to stand, tangling in the blankets. A stab of pain shot through his legs, but he forced himself to move. "Don't let them..." He was too late. Through the window, he saw the front door swing open. Holly and Joshua scampered onto the snow-dusted porch, giggling at the pale, shimmering flakes drifting down. Jake tore off the blankets and staggered. Across the living room, nearly barreling past Mia. Outside, the wind carried those unnatural flakes in swirling eddies. The kids were already off the porch, catching them on their hands. Jake burst through the doorway, fear shredding his composure. "No. Get inside," he shouted, his voice cracking. Joshua turned at the sound, flakes dissolving onto his small palms. Holly squealed in delight as they fluttered against her coat. A moment later, Jake watched in horror as Joshua stuck out his tongue, letting the flakes land on it. Holly copied him, giggling at the strange sensation. "Stop!" Jake cried as he finally reached them, his voice choked with terror. Joshua looked up, blinking, the glowing flurries vanishing into his mouth. "The snow tastes kind of funny, Dad,"